Hey guys, tonight you find yourself waking long before sunrise on a pallet that seems to have been personally designed by damp straw, stubborn wood, and quiet medieval disappointment. The air is cold enough to bite at your nose. Smoke hangs in the rafters in a blue-grey veil, never quite leaving, as if the house itself has been sighing through the night. Beneath your rough wool blanket, your feet still remember yesterday's mud, though your boots, waiting by the wall, are already prepared to introduce you to a fresh supply. Somewhere outside, beyond the oak door with its iron latch, you hear the soft stamp of an animal in the yard, the drip of water from a trough, and, farther off, a bell speaking through the darkness from a monastery tower hidden in the mist. It is the sort of morning that makes you understand, very quickly, that medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience, and you, wrapped in smoke, chill, and the smell of damp hay, know with some honesty that you probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie still for a few breaths more, not because the day permits it, but because your body makes one last gentle argument against movement. Around you, the farmhouse begins to murmur awake in the dark. A sleeper near the hearth turns and coughs. Someone shifts under wool. A child, all warm breath and tangled limbs, makes the soft protesting noise of one being asked by fate to continue existing before dawn. The ashes in the hearth hold a faint pulse of red, small and stubborn, like the last good intention of yesterday. Then the house truly calls you back. The cold finds the gap at your neck. The smell of smoke settles into your hair and tunic. You push the blanket aside and sit up, your hand pressing for a moment into the rushes spread across the floor. They are old and flattened, sweet in one place, musty in another. Fresh rushes, when they are laid down, make a room feel almost noble. Old rushes tell the truth. They hold crumbs, soot, damp, and the memory of many boots. Some households scatter dried herbs among them to sweeten the floor or to keep vermin away. Some swear that fennel and lavender discourage wicked things as well as mice. No one can quite agree whether the herbs truly help, but medieval people are rarely troubled by the possibility that one remedy might need to perform several jobs at once. You grope for your clothes in the low light. Your tunic is stiff at the hem from yesterday's mud. Your hose have not become any softer overnight. Your fingers, still half asleep, fumble with the lace that feels as intricate as church law. Across the room, a woman kneels by the hearth and blows life into the embers. Sparks lift, vanish, and then a thin flame catches the kindling with a reluctant crackle. Soon the house fills with that comforting, practical smell of awakening fire smoke, dry twigs, yesterday's ash, and the promise of warmth delayed just enough to keep everyone humble. Outside, the world remains a shape more than a scene. When the door opens, it admits a blade of air so cold it might as well be sharpened. You step into the yard and feel the ground answer beneath your boots. Mud, half frozen at the edges, holds the print of cartwheels, hooves, and human heels. A faint skin of frost silvered the trough in the night, though not enough to last. The sky is still heavy with darkness, but at its edge there is the smallest thinning, a pale suggestion that morning is somewhere on the road. Your breath drifts white before you. So does the breath of the ox in the shed, slow and steaming, as if the animal carries its own little weather. You pause beside the low timber wall and put a hand on its rough flank. Warm, vast, patient. The ox turns one liquid eye toward you with the solemn expression of a creature already wiser than your entire household. There is no dramatic affection in it, only a practical partnership. You rise, it pulls, you tire, it waits, you complain, it ignores you. Frankly, it has the emotional style of a saint in a stained glass window. The first task is water, because in a medieval home nearly everything begins with either fire or water, and usually both are inconvenient. You take the bucket and cross the yard toward the well, your boots making that sticky sucking sound in the churned earth that no century has ever improved. Somewhere a rooster attempts optimism. Somewhere else another rooster answers as if to say that optimism is all very well, but volume is what matters. A dog appears from under a cart, gives you a look of intense but unearned authority, and follows 3 paces behind. At the well, the rope is rough in your palm. The pulley complains softly. When the bucket goes down, you hear the delayed slap and swirl below. Then the long pull back up begins, shoulders waking one complaint at a time. The cold water catches the thin early light and turns briefly to dull silver. You carry it back carefully, sloshing some onto your hands, and the chill bites hard enough to make you hiss through your teeth. Behind the house, a narrow path leads toward the byre and the little patch of ground where kitchen scraps are thrown. The smell there is strong and honest manure, old straw, wet wood, and animal heat. For a moment it is almost overwhelming. Then, like everything else in this life, it settles into background. Medieval people live close to things modern noses treat as emergencies. Smell is not an interruption here. It is part of the walls, the clothes, the weather, the rhythm of the body itself. You bring fodder, loosen a tether, check a gate. The work is small in gestures, endless in repetition. That is the first truth of the farmer's life. Nothing is ever grand enough to feel finished. A nobleman may point to a hall and say it is built. A monk may close a manuscript and say it is copied. A farmer looks at a field, an animal, a roof, a cart, a ditch, a store jar, a fence, a loaf, and knows all of it will need doing again. This is why being a medieval farmer never really ends. The labour does not conclude, it circles, it returns. It waits overnight and greets you before dawn as if the two of you had arranged to meet. A bell sounds again in the distance, clearer now. It rolls across the fields with a calm authority that reaches even here, where your hands smell of rope and wet grain. Monastery bells mark time for people who cannot read clocks and do not need them. Prime, terse, sex names drift through the world whether a peasant knows the Latin behind them or not. The bell says morning more clearly than the sky does. It says get on with it. It says the day belongs to God, the Lord, the weather, the harvest, the rent, the beasts, and only after all that, perhaps a little bit to you. You step back into the farmhouse with another armful of wood. The room is warmer now but dim. Firelight shivers across the beams. On a shelf, a beeswax candle reserved for better evenings sits untouched, while the common tallow light does the present work and smokes for the privilege. A wooden spoon, a chipped pot, a loaf wrapped in cloth, a little crock of ale gone flat from yesterday. These are the quiet treasures of the house, not abundance, just survival arranged neatly. Breakfast is not yet served. If served is the word for taking what is there and thanking heaven it exists. But already the household is moving toward it, each person drawn by heat and habit. One of the older women mutters that stepping out before dawn with an empty stomach invites bad luck. Another replies that stepping out after dawn invites a scolding, between superstition and necessity. Necessity usually wins, though it rarely has the more interesting story. Some swear that if the first person to leave the house on a winter morning stumbles over the threshold, the weather will turn foul before noon. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such sayings are warnings, jokes, or small attempts to pretend the world offers clues before it strikes. Near the hearth, a child holds out chilled fingers to the fire and stares at the flames as though trying to memorize courage from them. Someone tears coarse bread. Someone else checks a pot. You stand for a moment, warming your hands, feeling the ache in your shoulders settle into place like a familiar tool. The light through the door has shifted from black to charcoal grey. The shape of the yard is visible now. So are the fields beyond it, lying low and wide under mist. Each ridge and furrow waiting like lines on an old face. This is only the beginning. You have not yet crossed the field. You have not yet eaten properly. You have not yet bent your back to the Lord's strips, or measured the sky for rain, or listened for gossip by the lane, or worried over seed, rent, and weather in the same breath. Yet already the day has laid its hands on you. That is the secret of it. A farmer's day begins before the sun, and the life itself begins before any one task. You wake inside labour the way others wake inside weather. The dog from the yard noses at the threshold, hopeful and shameless. Someone tosses it a crust. It takes the offering with the gravity of a knight receiving land. And now, with the house finally breathing warmth, with the bells still muttering somewhere beyond the mist, and with morning sharpening itself over the fields, you stand ready to begin the true work of the day. Morning does not so much arrive as slowly reveal what has already been waiting for you in the dark by the time you step out again. The yard has taken shape in a dull wash of grey light, and every familiar thing looks briefly strange, as if the world has been sketched in ash before colour is allowed back in. The cart leans where it always leans. The fence lists in the same weary place. The trough glistens with the skin of cold water. Beyond it all, the footpaths that join house to shed to lane, lane to field, show themselves as dark ribbons of churned earth and trampled straw. No lord commissions them. No surveyor measures them. They are simply worn into the ground by the truth of repeated need. You cross the yard with a basket of scraps and a forked stick, moving carefully where the mud is deepest. The path dips near the byre, and there your boot sinks almost to the ankle with a wet, disagreeable sound that feels far too cheerful for the hour. There is really no dignified way to recover from such a moment. Medieval life offers many opportunities for quiet spiritual reflection, but it offers just as many for being outwitted by the ground itself. You wrench your foot free, leaving the mud offended and unconvinced. At the animal shelter, the smell is thicker now that the air has begun to stir. Warm dung steams faintly. Straw crackles under hoof. A goat eyes you with the fixed suspicion of a tax collector. Chickens fuss and mutter over nothing any human mind could identify. You unlatch, lift, scatter, check. It is always some combination of those. Fodder goes into troughs. Water is topped up. A tether is retied where a creature wiser than it looks has worried it loose in the night. You run your hand down the flank of a cow and feel the hide twitch beneath your palm. The beast turns her head just enough to remind you that she's entirely aware of your presence, but not necessarily impressed by it. The work is not glamorous, though that word would mean little here. It is necessary, which is the much older and much sterner form of importance. Before fields, before roads, before market, the creatures must be seen to. A farmer who ignores his animals learns very quickly that neglect is expensive. A hungry pig complains loud enough for heaven to hear. A loose hen disappears into a hedge and returns only when it suits her, if at all. An ox with sore feet can undo a whole day's labour before breakfast is properly remembered. From the shelter you carry a pail toward the lane. The path is edged with old ruts hardened by colder days and softened again by thaw. Frost still clings to the shaded grass in pale threads, while the middle of the track is dark and wet, trodden by boots, hooves, and wheels into a substance halfway between earth and grievance. You follow it to the common well and past 2 neighbours already abroad. No one wastes many words this early. A nod is enough. A glance at the sky is almost a full conversation. Still, no village morning is truly silent. Somewhere behind a wattled fence, a baby complains at the injustice of being alive before sunrise. A woman shakes a cloth at her door. A man coughs into the cold with the depth and ceremony of a church organ. Farther off, a cartwheel bumps over a stone and then another, sounding more wounded each time. From one chimney rises the smell of peat smoke, from another the sweeter scent of wood smoke, and from a third the harsh reminder that something damp has been burned, because something dry could not be spared. You keep to the firmer side of the lane where you can. On your left, a ditch carries a slow ribbon of brown water between sedges and broken reeds. On your right, the first open strips of cultivated land lie under the weak light, still silvered in places where the frost has not given up. The ridges run long and patient across the ground, each one a mark of old labour and future labour together. Medieval fields are rarely the neat, private parcels later centuries come to adore. They are shared, divided, obligated, parcelled into strips and customs and claims that overlap like threads in old cloth. You may work one strip here, another there, one owed to your household, another to the Lord, another perhaps entangled in some old arrangement no one under 40 fully understands but no one dares ignore. No one can quite agree whether the land makes the villagers stubborn, or the villagers make the land so stubborn in return. Either way, both have the same expression by dawn. At the well, a line has already formed in the quiet, unspoken way such lines do. You are not first, and there is little glory in being first besides colder hands. A girl with red knuckles and a kerchief tied badly under her chin hauls up a bucket, with the fierce concentration of someone who's been told all her life that spilled water is nearly a sin. An old man beside her mutters that the east wind means rain by evening. Another answers that yesterday the crows flew low, so perhaps it means frost instead. Both speak with total conviction. Weather law is a kind of village scholarship, passed hand to hand like bread, and contradicted with equal confidence every few yards. Some swear that if the smoke from the cottage roofs drifts flat across the fields, wet days are coming. Some watch the geese. Some trust the colour of dawn. Some trust the ache in a knee more than all the skies above Christendom. You draw your own bucket and lift it carefully. The rope burns your palm. The water is bitter cold and perfectly clear for half a heartbeat before the bucket swings and clouds itself with silt. By the time you turn homeward, the dog from earlier has appeared again as if summoned by your inconvenience. It trots beside you, not helping in any measurable way, but contributing the strong impression that it considers this a joint undertaking. On the walk back, the light grows better, not warm, never that, but clearer. You begin to see details that dawn had mercy enough to hide. The patch in your sleeve needs mending. The cart near the hedge still lists where one wheel sits slightly crooked from last week's crack in the rim. A pile of firewood is smaller than it looked at night, which feels like a personal betrayal. The roof over the lean-to has lost another bit of thatch. Every object in sight has a task attached to it. Some already done badly, most not done yet, all waiting with patient accusation. That, perhaps, is the truest burden of this life. Not simply the labour, but the fact that the eye can never rest without finding another necessity. A wall is not merely a wall, but a wall that leans. A gate is a latch about to fail. A blanket is wool that must be aired, beaten, patched, protected from damp and moth. Even a footpath is work in disguise. If it floods, someone must trench it. If it freezes, someone must salt it with ash or straw. If carts deepen its ruts, everyone complains and then uses it anyway. Back in the yard, you set down the water and fetch tools. The hoe has mud dried hard along its edge. The wooden rake has one tooth shorter than the rest. The basket you need still smells faintly of last season's onions. You gather them one by one from where they hang or lean inside the shed, and each thing has the weight of history in it, because tools are not easily replaced here. Handles are smoothed by fathers' hands and mothers' hands and older children's hands too. Iron is precious. Wood is never just wood when it has been shaped carefully and kept through more winters than a person can conveniently remember. Even a cracked basket may receive another season of use if the split is turned toward the less judgmental side. Near the doorway hangs a little bunch of dried herbs tied with faded string. Sage, perhaps, or mugwort, or something that began as one and has slowly become dust. A charm, maybe. A remedy, maybe. In many cottages, such bundles hang near doors and beds alike, part medicine, part blessing, part habit inherited from someone who inherited it in turn. Some swear that hanging rowan or hawthorn near the byre keeps sour spirits from troubling milk cows. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the danger comes from witches, wandering dead, jealous neighbours, or merely very bad luck wearing a convenient face. In practice, most people hedge their bets. They say their prayers, keep a charm, and hope the cow remains cooperative. By now the sky is lifting toward a pale blue under the cloud, and the village has fully entered the business of the day. Children carry kindling. A woman in a fur-lined cloak too worn to flatter anyone strides across the lane, with a basket on her arm and purpose in every step. Two boys drive a pair of geese with all the authority of kings and none of the success. At the far end of the track, a man shoulders a yoke and starts toward the field with the gait of one whose back has already made peace with pain because rebellion achieved nothing. You follow the narrowing footpath away from the houses and toward the open ground. Here the earth lies stiff in places and slick in others, the frost giving way under your tread. The hedges are tangled with last year's dead growth, and beyond them the fields stretch low and broad beneath a sky still undecided. A rook rises from the furrows with a hoarse complaint. Somewhere in the distance comes the faint clank of metal from a smithy beginning its own day. The sound carries farther in cold air, thin but steady, as if another life entirely is being hammered awake just beyond sight. You pause at the edge of the first strip and look back only for a moment. Smoke lifts from the cottage roofs in wavering lines. The lane curls between them. The dog, still inexplicably loyal to this arrangement, sits on the path and scratches itself with the self-possession of a minor lord. Behind you lies shelter, such as it is. Before you lies the open labour of the day, frost on the stubble, mud under the sole, tools in hand, breath in the cold. This is the hour when the body fully understands what the mind suspected from the first bell. The day will take everything it asked for, and then return tomorrow for more. So you step forward into the fields, where the ground is wet, the light is thin, and the work has been waiting for you all night. By the time you turn back from the edge of the field, it is not from idleness, nor from mercy, but because the morning requires one more small anchoring before it properly claims you. Medieval labour begins early, yes, but does not begin sensibly on an empty stomach unless necessity has grown especially sharp. And necessity, though a constant companion, has not yet become quite so dramatic today. So you carry your tools back toward the cottage, your boots rimmed in damp earth, your fingers stiff around the handle, while the village settles into that smoky interval between first tasks and full exertion. The door opens with its usual groan, letting out a breath of warmth scented with ash, stale ale, old wool, and something quietly cooking. The change is immediate enough to feel miraculous for a second, though miracles in this life tend to arrive in the modest forms of shelter, heat, and soup that has not burnt. Inside, the fire has grown stronger. Orange light licks along the blackened stones of the hearth and flickers over the soot-dark rafters, where years of smoke have written a history no scribe would envy. A pot hangs above the flames, and another sits near enough to keep warm without boiling over. That balance alone is practically a form of scholarship. Breakfast, when it comes, is not an event but an arrangement. A board is set across two stools. Bread is brought out from its cloth. Ale is poured, weaker than what later hours might allow, though weaker in this context still means you would not be recommending it to modern children before school unless you wish to cause a rather memorable parent meeting. A little onion is cut, a pinch of salt is used with care, because salt has travelled farther than most peasants ever will and behaves accordingly. Perhaps there is a scrap of cheese if fortune has been in a decent mood. Perhaps there is a bit of a yesterday's pottage reheated until it remembers what it was meant to be. You sit close enough to the hearth to feel one side of your legs warm while the other stays unconvinced. The bread is coarse and dense, marked by dark flour and whatever grains the year has allowed. It asks your teeth for commitment. There is nothing airy about it, nothing soft beyond the centre where it has kept a little moisture. Yet the smell of it, broken open by hand, carries its own comfort grain, warmth, wood smoke, the plain satisfaction of something made from labour and fire. You tear a piece, dip it into the edge of the pot and eat slowly. The pottage is thick in the way that humble food must be to seem generous. Barley, perhaps, or peas, or oats, with onion softened almost to sweetness, and a little green taste from leeks if any remain. A sliver of smoked fish may have gone into it, or not. A shred of pork fat might be there, floating more as memory than substance. Some mornings pottage tastes of thrift, some mornings it tastes of patience. Today it tastes mostly of heat, and heat is argument enough in its favour. Around you, the household makes a quiet orchestra of necessity. Bowls scrape, wooden spoons knock lightly against the rim. Someone blows on a mouthful and sighs before swallowing. Not from drama, but from gratitude too simple to dress up. A child eyes the loaf as though staring hard enough might multiply it. An older woman cuts the bread with the stern precision of one who has spent a lifetime dividing not only food, but fairness. Every portion says something about the season, the stores, the weather ahead, and who did or did not finish the last crust yesterday. You drink from a cup of ale, and it is sour at the edge, flat in the middle, and still oddly reassuring. Water can be trusted from the well, yes, if it is good and recently drawn, but ale is part nourishment, part habit, part safer gamble in some seasons than the standing water that collects where geese are overly interested in theology. Small beer and weak ale accompany medieval meals not because everyone is in a tavern mood before sunrise, But because brewing is part of the household's practical rhythm, grain becomes drink almost as naturally as flour becomes bread. The line between sustenance and custom is thin enough to walk across without noticing. Across the room, near a shelf of wooden trenchers and one cracked glazed cup that the family keeps with the reverence usually reserved for relics, hangs a bunch of garlic braided with a dried sprig of something bitter. It is there for cooking, for medicine, for warding off corruption, and possibly for scolding evil spirits with its smell. Medieval households are wonderfully efficient in this way. An herb is rarely allowed only one purpose. Sage may soothe the throat, season the broth, and discourage invisible trouble. Honey may sweeten, preserve, dress a wound, and prove useful in prayers for a child's cough. If a thing exists in a cottage, it had better justify the shelf space. Some swear that eating the heel of the loaf brings strength for field work. Others insist it brings stubbornness, which in a farmer may be difficult to distinguish from health. No one can quite agree whether the first slice should go to the eldest, the worker bound for the hardest labour, or the soul most likely to complain if denied it. In many homes, such matters are settled not by principle, but by habit older than memory. And habit, in the medieval world, often has all the force of law without the inconvenience of being written down. A little ash drifts as the fire shifts. The woman at the hearth reaches for the iron hook and adjusts the pot with a confidence so practised it looks almost careless. Beside her, on the stones, lie oatcakes cooling on a board. On another morning you might have them with curds, or with a smear of dripping if a slaughter had recently blessed the household. Today the fare remains plain, which is another way of saying honest. There is no feast hidden in the cupboard. No pie waits just off stage. What you see is what the land has permitted. And yet even plainness has its rituals. Before anyone truly begins to eat, one person murmurs a blessing. It is short, half prayer and half rhythm learned young. The words pass over the bread, the ale, the steam from the pot. Perhaps the speaker means every syllable. Perhaps half the room is too cold and hungry to feel much beyond relief. But the blessing is said all the same. In a life ruled by uncertainty, words spoken over food are another form of storing up against trouble. Outside, through the half-open shutter, the village sharpens in the light. You hear the creak of a wheel, the cluck of hens, the distant bark of the same shameless dog who has apparently decided to supervise the parish. A bell sounds again, farther and fainter now, its note rolling over the fields with that same calm insistence. Time in this world arrives by sound as often as by sight. Bells, cocks, carts, voices, rain on thatch, wind under the eaves. Clocks belong to towers and abbeys. Ordinary people learn the day by listening. You chew another piece of bread and watch someone sweep the rushes with a short broom made from bound twigs. Dust and crumbs shift. So does a hidden bead, perhaps dropped months ago, and one small chicken feather that has no clear business being indoors. Rushes on the floor do what they can. Fresh ones sweeten the room for a little while, especially if strewn with meadowsweet or mint. Old ones collect the domestic truth of a household spilled broth, soot, scraps, damp, secrets. Every so often they are changed, though rarely as often as a noble's chronicler might lead you to imagine. There is always another task first. As you eat, the warmth of the fire begins to loosen the hard edge of the morning from your hands. This is dangerous in its own small way, because comfort invites imagination. For one foolish breath you can almost believe in lingering. Another cup, another moment by the flames, another look into the glowing heart of the hearth where the embers settle like red coins. But the day has no use for such thoughts. The field is waiting. The animals are fed but not finished with. Wood must be carried. Water must be lifted again before long. The cartwheel still leans. The roof still knows it is missing thatch. Every bite you take is both nourishment and a quiet agreement to resume. One of the children asks whether the wind sounds different today. Someone answers that it sounds like damp by noon. Another says the smoke went east, which means fair weather unless St. Swithin is meddling again. A third snorts softly and says saints are blamed for a great many things that belong quite obviously to clouds. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such comments are irreverent, devout, or merely practical. Medieval people live close to the sacred, but they also live close to leaking roofs and stubborn weather. Theology and annoyance share a bench more often than either admits. You finish the pottage and wipe the bowl with the last piece of bread, because nothing worth eating is left behind unless someone has become unexpectedly wealthy overnight. The cup is drained, the board is cleared. What remains are crumbs, warmth in the stomach, and the faintest illusion that the day may now be faced with reason. Around you, cloaks are gathered, sleeves rolled, baskets lifted, a wool cap is tugged on, a kerchief is retied. One person tucks a small charm into the fold of a sleeve, a little cross of twigs bound with red thread, perhaps, or a token touched once to a saint's relic at a local shrine. Some swear such things guard against mishap in the field. Others wear them because their mothers did. In uncertain lives, inheritance and belief are often the same object seen from two sides. You rise at last from the hearth, and the warmth begins leaving you almost immediately, as if it never intended to make promises. The door opens. Cold air enters in one flat, unforgettable sheet. The smoke lifts and twists. You step through it back into the morning with bread in your belly, ale on your breath, and the taste of onion, grain, and ash still lingering on your tongue. It is a small meal, a brief pause, hardly worth notice, perhaps, to those who imagine history only in battles and crowns. But this is the hinge on which the day turns. Fire, bread, weak ale, steam from the pot, rushes underfoot, blessings half spoken, worries half joked, and then the return to labour. Even breakfast here is not separate from the work. It is the work, in another form. The grain had to be grown, ground, kneaded, baked. The ale had to be brewed. The wood had to be cut. The pot had to be watched. Everything feeds everything else. So you pull your cloak close, lift your tools again, and go back out toward the fields, carrying the quiet strength of the hearth only as far as the wind allows. The warmth of the cottage leaves you faster than good intentions. One moment you carry it in your chest and hands, tucked there beside the taste of onion and ale, and the next the open air has thinned it into memory. You set out toward the Lord's fields with your tools on your shoulder and the wet ground pulling at your boots, while the morning spreads itself wider across the countryside in a pale, undecided light. Behind you, smoke rises from the cottages in faint wavering lines. Ahead, the land lies open and waiting, all ridge and furrow, ditch and boundary, obligation and weather. This is where the pleasant fiction of your day's work begins to lose some of its shine. A medieval farmer works, yes, but not always first for himself. The strips nearest your cottage, the patch that might feed your household if the year behaves, the little garden where onions push up and cabbages stand in stubborn silence. Those belong to one kind of labour, but the domain lands, the broad acres worked for the Lord, belong to another. You owe days here. You owe your back, your hands, your time, your ox if called upon, your cart perhaps, your patience certainly. The land may be under your feet, but that does not mean it answers to you. You follow the track where others already go. Scattered figures dark against the dull silver of the fields. Cloaks sway. Tools catch the light at their edges. A cart rattles ahead. One wheel still making that unhappy note that speaks of age, mud, and a carpenter's future involvement. There is very little chatter. Breath is being saved. Strength is being measured. Morning in the fields asks for silence, not because anyone has grown wise overnight, but because the soil has a way of making speech feel like an extra load to carry. When you reach the strip assigned for the morning, the earth tells you at once what sort of day it intends to be. It is heavy, not impossible, not hostile in any theatrical sense, but heavy in the plain, intimate way that asks more from your shoulders than you wanted to give. The top crust, kissed by the night's chill, breaks reluctantly under boot and blade. Beneath it the soil is dark and damp, clinging to wood, iron, and leather alike. You drive the tool in, lever up, break the clod, move apace, and do it again. The rhythm comes not from enthusiasm but from acceptance. Around you, other bodies fall into the same repeated motion, each person bent toward the ground as if listening for an answer only the soil might give. A man 2 strips over works with the slow care of someone guarding his strength hour by hour. A woman farther down the line pauses to wipe her hands on her apron and push hair back beneath her kerchief, then resumes without ceremony. An older boy leads an ox team with the solemn concentration of youth temporarily promoted into necessity. The oxen themselves move with that grand, resigned patience only very large animals possess, steaming gently in the cold air, their hooves sinking and lifting, as if time itself has been harnessed to a wooden yoke. No one can quite agree whether oxen are wiser than horses or merely more difficult to flatter. What everyone agrees on is that, for ploughing heavy land, they do not waste themselves on style. They pull. That is enough. The plough groans as it cuts. Leather creaks. A voice clicks softly to guide the beasts. A raven calls from somewhere beyond the hedge, sounding like a clerk objecting to a tax record. The smell here is rich and close wet earth turned fresh, trampled grass, animal heat, and the faint iron tang from tools that have known many seasons. It is not the romantic scent of the countryside promised by people who visit it briefly in better boots. It is stronger than that, denser, alive with work. You take your place where you are needed. Sometimes that means guiding, sometimes clearing stones from the furrow, sometimes breaking clods behind the plough so the field lies more open to seed later on, sometimes simply carrying, lifting, fetching, repeating. Medieval agriculture is not one grand heroic motion across a golden landscape. It is 1,000 smaller obediences made by body and daylight. Bend, lift, walk, turn, press, wipe the mud from the blade, bend again, and always, over it all, is the knowledge that this labour is owed. That is the true weight hidden inside the soil. The manor system is stitched through your life so tightly you feel it even when no steward stands nearby. It is there in the days you must give to the Lord's fields before your own strips receive their due. It is there in the grain owed, the hens owed, the labour owed at harvest, the fee perhaps for using the mill, the fee perhaps for baking in the Lord's oven if such custom rules here. A peasant's calendar is full not merely of seasons, but of claims. At the edge of the field stands a man with a staff and a hood drawn close, not lordly enough to be feared on sight, but official enough to make everyone straighten a little when he passes. A reeve, perhaps, or a bailiff's helper, keeping count in that half-formal, half-familiar way that turns neighbours into instruments of order. Medieval villages are full of such arrangements. The man who watches may have muddy boots like yours. He may have eaten the same pottage. He may also be the one who notes whether work was properly rendered, or who muttered too freely about it. Authority here does not always ride in on a horse. Sometimes it lives 3 doors down and borrows your shovel. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand, though the day remains cool. Already your shoulders speak in a low, steady complaint. Your palms know every roughness of the handle. Soil cakes at the hem of your tunic. Your boots grow heavier with each crossing. This is still morning. That is perhaps the most insulting part. Nearby, a woman says under her breath that the field would yield more if the Lord prayed over it less and manured it more. The line earns the smallest burst of tired amusement, there and gone. The best jokes in a medieval field are the ones that do not cost enough energy to laugh at properly. A little later, one of the oxen balks, not dramatically, just enough to remind every watching human that the true ruler of the pace may weigh 1/2 a ton and possess horns. The driver murmurs, tugs, waits. Someone suggests the beast saw a spirit in the hedge. Someone else says it saw only the man holding the goad and judged him accordingly. Some swear animals sense what people do not: storms, strangers, restless dead, holy presences, bad luck creeping up the lane. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where such knowledge resides, in the nose, the eye, the soul, or simple stubbornness. Whatever the cause, after a moment the ox moves again, and philosophy gives way to furrow. As the hours lengthen, the light changes from grey to a pale washed gold that never quite warms the skin. Rooks hop in the newly disturbed earth behind the plough, hunting whatever the blade has revealed. The hedges shine with spider silk strung in the damp. In the distance, beyond the rising ground, you glimpse the roofline of the manor itself, and farther still the square tower of a church, its stone pale against the sky. It is all one world, joined by rent, bell, track, and weather. The high walls and the muddy furrow answer to one another more than either side likes to admit. Your body settles into the kind of labour that erases the hours without easing them. The mind drifts while the hands continue. You think of the fire back at the cottage, now reduced perhaps to a quieter glow. You think of the bread heel that remained on the board. You think of the dog, who may by now have appointed itself guardian of some entirely unrelated threshold. You think of the cartwheel that still needs attention. Every thought returns eventually to work, because here work is not separate from life. It fills the seams. At one point you stoop to pull a stone from the furrow, and it comes loose with a sucking twist of mud, heavier than its size deserves. Stones are the field's private joke. They rise year after year, as if the earth itself keeps changing its mind about what belongs on the surface. You toss it aside into a growing pile near the edge. Some day those stones may mend a wall, fill a hole, brace a threshold, line a drainage ditch. Nothing is truly wasted if labour can find a second use for it. A breeze moves over the field, carrying the smell of damp grass and distant wood smoke. It lifts the edge of your cloak and cools the sweat at your neck. For a few breaths the work almost becomes bearable in a different way. Not lighter, but cleaner somehow. This is as close to peace as many labouring people come while standing upright a steady task. A moving breeze, no immediate injury, no sudden shout, and enough daylight still ahead to believe the day can be endured. Then someone calls for a team to shift farther down, and the brief serenity breaks apart into more hauling, more guiding, more trudging through the soft edge of the strip where every step threatens to keep part of your boot as tribute. The ground grabs. The tool handle rubs a hot place into your palm. A crow laughs from a post. You begin to suspect the entire landscape is taking a mild interest in your discomfort. Still you go on because everyone goes on. This is the hidden fellowship of the field-shared exhaustion, shared silence, shared awareness that the bread at night, the rent later, the seed next month, the winter beyond that, all begin here in this unremarkable stretch of earth. A lord may dine from silver, a monk may write in red and gold ink, a knight may polish his pride along with his spurs, but sooner or later someone must stand in the mud and persuade the soil to answer. By the time the morning edges toward noon, your back has become one long fact. Your hands are numb in some places and burning in others. Your stomach, despite breakfast, has begun to remember its own ambitions. And still the Lord's field lies larger than it looked at dawn, because fields, like chores and sermons, always expand to fit the patience available. You straighten for a moment and look along the strips, the furrows, the bent figures, the oxen moving under breath and leather and wood. This is not your whole life, and yet it defines so much of it. To farm in this world is to live under layers of claim weather above, custom around, hunger below, and authority running through the middle like a hidden route, even now, with the bell somewhere far off and the mist fully burned away. It is hard to tell whether the land owns the people or the people merely borrow themselves from the land a day at a time. Then the call comes to pause, and you lean on the handle, chest rising slowly, while the field gives you a brief mercy before the next demand. The pause comes over the village fields not like celebration, but like a collective loosening of ropes that have been pulled tight since before dawn. No one cheers. No one drops tools with theatrical relief. Medieval people are far too acquainted with labour to perform surprise at its existence. But bodies straighten. Shoulders roll once, carefully, as if afraid to insult the muscles by pretending they are not already offended. Hands flex open and closed. Someone rubs a wrist. Someone else shifts a boot against a clod to scrape away the worst of the mud, only to discover that the mud has become a committed and long-term companion. You step back from the furrow and follow the narrow trampled line toward the edge of the field, where a few others gather in the lee of a hedge. The earth there is only slightly less wet. The wind is only slightly less sharp. In peasant life, comfort is often measured not in absolutes, but in very modest improvements. Less cold, less wet, less smoke in the eyes, less distance to carry something heavy. Great luxury is rare. Slight advantage is the currency of the day. From here, with the work temporarily at your back, the village reveals itself in bits and pieces beyond the fields. Smoke rises from low roofs. A cart rolls between cottages. A child chases another child, and then abandons the pursuit to stare at a goose with great seriousness. A woman in a dark cloak bends over a doorway and beats a cloth against the frame, sending dust into the air like a brief grey blessing. The world is in motion everywhere, and not only in the furrows. That is the thing city folk and chroniclers so often miss. A village is never still simply because no one important is recording it. You take the flask or small jug past your way and drink sparingly. The ale is cool, sour, a little cloudy, and welcome all the same. Nearby, a scrap of bread appears from a cloth, then another, then perhaps a bit of onion or a pinch of salt wrapped in something that has already served as wrapping 3 times this week and will not be retired yet. Such moments draw people together without much ceremony. You do not need an invitation where everyone is equally tired. Proximity is fellowship enough. And here, at the field's edge, the village begins to sound more fully alive. Voices carry, a laugh rises and falls, A dog barks from somewhere near the lane, sounding suspiciously like the same self-appointed guardian who has haunted your morning. You would not be surprised if it were. Medieval villages produce certain recurring truths: mud where you least want it, smoke where you least expect it, and one dog that behaves as if all administration has quietly been entrusted to him. A pair of neighbours settle not far from you, breaking bread and trading news in low tones. News, in a place like this, travels along odd routes and with remarkable persistence. A bent fence, a sick cow, an argument over a boundary stone, a cousin passing through from another village, a priest who spoke too long on St. Martin's Day, a cart axle broken on the North Road, a child with a cough that sounds worse at night, a widow who has somehow coaxed beans from poor soil again, and therefore must either be gifted or suspicious. The village binds itself through these threads, not always kindly, but tightly. One man mentions that the miller's son has been seen near the cooper's daughter again, which would matter less if the miller were not notoriously sharp in his counting, and the cooper not equally sharp in his objections. A woman says she heard that old Hannah by the ford keeps a charm of rowan tied above her bed and mutters to it before sleeping. Another replies that if Hannah has survived 6 winters in that draughty hut, perhaps the charm deserves a little respect. No one can quite agree whether such stories are mockery, admiration, or both. In a medieval village, they are often inseparable. The fellowship of peasants is not soft, exactly, but it is real. You borrow from each other, grumble at each other, stand witness for each other in manor disputes, carry each other's news, judge each other's marriages, count each other's hens when they stray, and appear without asking when a roof beam fails or a beast calves badly in the night. There is very little privacy where cottages huddle close and lives depend on mutual notice. Even silence is observed. If someone fails to come out by dawn, someone else notices. If smoke does not rise from a known hearth, eyes turn. If a family's bread grows thinner by the week, the lane knows before the priest does. You chew your share slowly and watch 2 boys hauling a small handcart along the track between the fields. The wheel catches on a rut, jolts, and sends one of them into a muttered speech so intense and specific it almost qualifies as theology. He rights the cart and continues. That is village life in miniature brief misery, immediate correction, onward. When the pause ends, or rather thins, you drift back toward the lane with others whose tasks lie nearer the cottages for an hour or 2. Not all labour belongs to one patch of earth at once. That is another truth of the place. A village lives by divided attention. Someone tends a field while someone mends harness. Someone patches a wall while someone minds children, and someone else walks to borrow yeast, return a bowl, trade eggs for salt, or ask whether the old widow at the edge of the common still has that salve for cracked hands made from goose fat and marigold. Every household leaks need in a dozen directions. You pass between the cottages now, along paths worn low by feet and weather. The ground is firmer near one threshold where broken pottery and ashes have been scattered to help with the wet, and looser near another where a pig has recently conducted a private campaign against order. Doors stand half open. From within comes the smell of boiling cabbage, wet wool hung to dry, leather warmed by the hearth, and that everlasting smoky sweetness of rushes slowly surrendering to feet, ash, and time. At one cottage, an old man sits on a stool near the wall in a patch of pale light, carving a new peg for something whose original peg should clearly have had more respect. He looks up, nods, and returns to work. Near him lies a basket of onions and a crooked iron key the size of a child's hand. Keys in this world are impressive things. heavy enough to look symbolic, even when they merely secure a grain chest or a door swollen by damp. A good iron key suggests that somewhere nearby there is something worth worrying over. A woman carrying a bucket calls out to ask whether the reeve seemed sour this morning. 3 opinions answer before the question fully lands. This too is village custom. You ask for a practical fact and receive weather, memory, insult, and prophecy in one bundle. Someone says he looked tired. Someone says he always looks tired because counting other people's labour is a burden on the soul. Someone else says his wife's brother has a fever, which explains the face. Then a 4th voice mutters that he looked pleased enough when measuring strips last week, and that settles nothing except the appetite for further discussion. You carry a bundle of split wood from a lean-to to the cottage door, and from there another basket is thrust into your hands for turning out spoiled turnips near the midden. So it goes. A village notices whoever is standing still and cures the problem immediately. Labour here is contagious. You cannot cross a yard with empty arms for long without someone discovering a use for them. Still, amid the ceaseless small demands, there is texture and companionship. A child with straw in her hair solemnly shows you a chicken feather as if presenting a saint's relic. A woman laughs once, unexpectedly, when a goat catches its horn in a hurdle, and then behaves as though injustice has been formally declared against it. 2 neighbours discuss the best way to keep mice from grain bins, one advocating a cat, the other insisting that hanging dried mint and muttering psalm verses works just as well, though the cat remains suspiciously more popular. Some swear that mice flee from Saint Gertrude's protection if her image is scratched discreetly onto a chest. Others trust only traps and hungry farm cats, which is perhaps the more earthly theology. You pass the smithy lane and hear iron on iron ringing sharp in the brighter air now. The sound feels almost noble compared to the squelch of fields and the hush of cottage interiors. Not grand, exactly, but purposeful in a way that echoes beyond the work itself. Every village depends on 1 or 2 people whose trades steady everyone else: the smith, the miller, the cooper, the carpenter, the woman who knows which herb eases a fever and which one merely makes the patient smell determined. Farmers keep the village breathing, but they do not breathe alone. In the small space before you are called back outward again. You notice how much of village life is built on tolerating constant nearness. Walls are thin, lanes are narrow, tempers are familiar, and memory is long. A generosity shown in autumn may still be mentioned in Lent. A quarrel over a pig rooting in the wrong patch may survive 3 harvests, and then reappear with renewed moral conviction during seed time. Children belong mostly to their parents and partly to every adult within hearing distance. Dogs drift from threshold to threshold, collecting crumbs and public office. Even the church bell, heard over all of it, does not so much command the village as stitch it together. As the sun climbs a little higher, though still weakly, movement gathers once more toward the open strips. Baskets empty. Water jars are set aside. A cloak is hitched tighter. Someone snatches a last mouthful. Another crosses herself before stepping back into the lane, not dramatically, just as one might tug a sleeve straight or check a knot. Faith here is often woven into gesture rather than speech. A sign, a whispered saint's name, a token sewn into a hem, a pilgrimage badge pinned to an old cloak on feast days. The sacred is never very far away, though it sits beside mud and gossip so comfortably that outsiders might fail to notice it at all. You head out again with the rest, the village thinning behind you into smoke, barking, muttered opinion, and the clink of ordinary objects being put to use. The fields wait as they always do, but now, after a little bread, a little talk, a little carrying and listening and standing among your neighbours. The labour feels less solitary, not lighter, never lighter, just shared. And in a medieval village, shared hardship is as close to wealth as many people ever come. By the time the day leans toward noon, the village has lost whatever softness dawn pretended to offer. The light is broader now, washed pale over the fields and cottages alike, and the air carries less of the night's silver edge and more of the honest smell of work turned earth. Warm hide, damp wool, smoke drifting from hearths rekindled for the midday meal, and the faint sour tang of ale opened too early to be called indulgence, and too often to be called special. Your stomach has been quietly patient up to this point, but patience is a virtue that weakens rapidly around noon, especially when a morning has already bent your back over someone else's field. The call to pause comes not with trumpets, of course, but with that gradual loosening you have already begun to recognize tools lowered, shoulders straightened, breath taken more deeply, eyes turning almost instinctively toward the village and the cottage smoke. Even the oxen seem aware of the shift. They stand steaming in the cooler pockets of air, tails flicking, vast sides rising and falling with the satisfaction of creatures who know perfectly well that humans have arranged the world so that they, at least, must be fed before anything else continues. You begin the walk back with the others, boots pressing familiar shapes into familiar mud. The field path runs between ridges worn down by generations of passage, and the earth, though drier at the surface than it was at dawn, still gives a little underfoot. It is the kind of ground that never lets you forget you are crossing it. Above, the sky has settled into a weak brightness that promises neither delight nor disaster. Medieval weather has a talent for withholding certainty until the moment certainty is least useful. As you near the village, the bells begin. They come from the church tower first, nearer and plainer, and then, after a little pause, another answering note drifts from farther off. Perhaps the abbey or monastery whose bells have been trailing through your day since before sunrise. Sound carries strangely over open country. A bell can seem both near enough to touch and impossibly distant, as if it comes not through air, but through the bones of the land itself. The notes roll over hedges, over cart tracks, over the roofs of cottages and the backs of men and women trudging in from labour. They say noon, yes, but more than that they say order, they say pause, they say that the day, however muddy and breathless it feels at ground level, is still being divided, named, and witnessed from higher stone. You hear one older man in front of you mutter the hour under his breath as if replying to the bell in courtesy. Another crosses himself quickly without breaking stride. A third, less devout or perhaps simply more tired, says only that if the monks can ring for eating, the least the rest of you can do is obey. The line earns a tired murmur of amusement. It is not much of a joke, but noon does not demand brilliance. Back in the cottage, the fire has been stirred again, and the sight of steam rising from the pot is enough to make your whole body lean slightly forward before you quite realize it. Hunger in this life is seldom dramatic in the way poets prefer. It is not usually a grand ache accompanied by speeches to heaven. More often it is a steady hollowing, a quiet, persuasive voice, the body reminding you that it has spent itself since dawn and would now like some sort of respectful acknowledgement. The midday meal is simple in the same way the morning meal was simple, though perhaps a little fuller if the day allows. Pottage again, because pottage is the quiet monarch of medieval eating. It can absorb almost anything that grows, keeps, softens, or can be cut small enough to justify the pot. Barley thickens it, peas lend body, leeks, onions, cabbage, and turnip drift through it like familiar parishioners. If there is smoked fish, it enters modestly. If there is a little pork, it goes in with far more ceremony than quantity. The pot is less a recipe than an argument against waste. You sit on the bench near the board and wrap your hands around the bowl before lifting the spoon. The heat seeps into your fingers first, then into your wrists, and only later into the rest of you. That may be the finest thing about a bowl of pottage at noon, not only that it fills, but that it warms from the hands inward, as if persuading the body to continue by courtesy rather than force. Beside it comes coarse bread, darker than a lord would bless willingly, dense and slightly sour, with a crust that resists just enough to remind you grain was not milled for softness alone. A little ale is poured. There may be a heel of cheese, a sliver of onion, perhaps even a smear of dripping saved from better days. All of it is set out with the grave practicality of people who understand the difference between comfort and waste. A meal does not need to astonish. It needs to hold you upright through the next stretch of labour. Around you the room settles into the familiar noises of eating spoons against wood, bread torn by hand, the low sigh one gives after the first hot mouthful, the scrape of a stool, the small impatient noise from a child told to slow down before scalding their tongue. Outside the shutter, village sounds continue but softened, as if noon itself has placed a hand over the day. A hen clucks somewhere near the threshold. A cartwheel mutters along the lane. The same dog. Unless the entire county is populated by identical scoundrels, appears again in the doorway with the expression of one who believes lunch is a communal principle. The bells still echo in your mind after they fade, and with them comes the strange feeling of medieval time not yours. Not exactly, but shared. A bell marks the hour for the priest, the monk, the reeve, the widow at her spinning, the child half asleep near the hearth, the labourer in the field, the traveller on the road. It draws all those different lives under one sound, however briefly. You may not own the day, but at least you hear its divisions with everyone else. Someone near the fire begins telling a story while eating, not because noon invites performance, but because people who labour together will always lay words over their chewing, if only to keep weariness from becoming too audible. It is an old tale, perhaps, the sort half the room already knows and the other half claims to. A story of a field boundary moved in the night by unseen hands, or a cartman who mocked a roadside shrine and found his wheel broken before sunset, or a woman who swore the saint's relic at the abbey cured her fever, while her sister whispered it was only the boiled willow bark and the passing of time. No one can quite agree whether these tales are warnings, memories, entertainments, or all three at once. That uncertainty is part of their flavour. An older woman, spoon in hand, says that her grandmother always insisted noon is a dangerous hour to fall asleep in summer, because wandering spirits mistake a sleeping soul for one not fully attached. Someone snorts softly and says, wandering spirits may do what they like so long as they also help stack kindling. Yet no one laughs too hard. Medieval superstition is rarely worn as a costume. It lives close to habit, and habit is stubborn. Even those who doubt often leave a little room for caution. Better not to whistle indoors. Better not to spill salt and ignore it. Better not to mock the old shrine by the road if the weather is already turning. You eat and listen, and slowly the food begins its quiet work. Hunger softens first. Then the sharper edge of fatigue settles lower in the bones, no longer crying out but taking up residence. This is the peculiar heaviness of noon, not the frantic emptiness of morning labour, nor the drifting weariness of evening, but a dense, seated tiredness. Your body, warmed and fed, briefly imagines stillness. Your shoulders release. Your eyelids consider treason. The bench beneath you seems less like furniture and more like a moral test. This is where habit saves the day, because habit does not ask your opinion. It has already lived through too many harvests, frosts, and rent days to be impressed by a bowl of pottage and a warm bench. You have eaten at noon before. You have felt this heaviness before. You know the body's small deception that because it is briefly satisfied, it imagines it is finished. But a medieval day never allows noon to mean completion. Noon is merely the hinge. The fields still wait. The tools still lie by the wall. The Lord's claim has not relaxed. The cartwheel remains crooked. The roof has not repaired itself out of Christian charity. A child, already drowsing against someone's sleeve, nearly slides sideways from the bench and is righted with one hand while the adult continues eating with the other. This, too, is medieval grace, the ability to manage sleep, hunger, smoke, children, and soup in one continuous motion. Near the hearth hangs a bundle of dried herbs turning faintly in the warm air. Mint, maybe, or vervain, or some old remedy now more decorative than medicinal. On the shelf beside it sits a little wax stub saved carefully for later. Nothing in the room is casual. Everything has a next use. The storyteller at the fire shifts from saints and spirits to local memory. He speaks now of a winter so hard the trough froze through, and men had to break water with mallets at dawn. Another adds that in the bad harvest year, people stretched oat flour with ground peas and acorns and still called it bread by charity more than honesty. Someone says that was also the year a pilgrim passed through carrying a badge from some distant shrine, and claimed he had seen a relic that wept. Some swear such relics truly do. Others say clever priests know what damp walls can accomplish. Even now, it is hard to tell where belief ends and weary humour begins. You take the last of the bread and wipe the bowl clean, because nothing worth swallowing should be left for the flies or the dog unless there is absolutely no witness to the waste. The ale is gone. The warmth remains, though it has turned now from comfort to ballast, settling in your middle with a slow and honest weight. This is not abundance. It is enough. And enough is a sacred category in a peasant life, though no gold leaf manuscript bothers to illuminate it. For a final moment, the room rests. Firelight shivers. Smoke hangs in the rafters. Bells no longer ring, but their order lingers. Outside, the lane waits. The fields wait. The whole afternoon waits with its muddy appetite. You become aware of your own breathing, slow and full. Weariness has not left you. It has simply folded itself more neatly into your bones, like a blanket too rough to be called soft but still useful against the cold. Then someone stands, another gathers bowls, a third reaches for the tools again. The spell of noon breaks without drama, because drama is for courts and chronicles. Village life moves by smaller laws. Eat, warm your hands, listen to old tales, let the bell mark the pause, then rise, because the day has not forgotten you. So you do. When you step back outside after the noon meal, the day has changed its face without improving its character. The light is fuller now, spread thinly over the village and the open strips beyond. But warmth still feels like a rumour passing from one person to another without proof. Smoke rises from cottage roofs in straighter lines than it did in the early morning, and the air carries that mixed scent of damp earth, old straw, cooling pottage pots, and the faint sweetness of wood smoke clinging to wool. You draw your cloak a little closer at the throat, though the gesture is mostly habit. The countryside notices no such complaints. The fields wait, of course. But before you set your shoulders to the afternoon's labour, your eyes do what every farmer's eyes must do, whether invited or not. They go upward, to the sky, to the wind, to the edges of cloud and the colour under them, to the treetops by the lane, to the movement of birds crossing low or high. Medieval farming is not only toil, it is reading. Reading signs without ever being told plainly whether the script is divine, natural, or merely spiteful. The clouds this afternoon move in slow-torn bands, grey along the underside, brighter at the edges where the weak sun catches them. There is blue beyond, but not enough to make promises. The wind comes from the west and then seems to remember something further north. It slides cool against your cheek and brings with it a smell of wet leaves from the wood beyond the common. A man beside you says it will rain by evening. Another says no, the wind is too clean for rain. A woman passing with a bundle of kindling says both men are fools because the swallows flew low over the byre yard an hour ago, and swallows no more than husbands. No one argues very hard. In village weather law, contradiction is not a flaw, it is the whole system. You take up your tool and walk back toward the open ground, but the sky keeps a hand on your attention. It must. A farmer ignores the heavens at personal risk. Too much rain, and the track becomes a trough. The seed rots, the hay spoils, the thatch leaks, and every chore acquires a second misery attached to it. Too little rain, and the ground hardens meanly. The shoots fail, the stream lowers, and people begin glancing toward saints with a more urgent sort of respect. A noble can pray for fair weather from under a stone roof. A farmer prays in mud, because weather climbs directly into his bread bin. By the hedge at the field's edge, an old woman pauses to adjust the cloth around her head and says she dreamt of red cattle in running water. She offers this as one might offer a measurement. To her, perhaps it is one. Some swear dreams before a weather turn are never ordinary. Some say if you dream of clear water, rain is coming. If of broken bread, there will be quarrels. If of white birds, someone will take ill. Others scoff by daylight and keep the dream to themselves after dark. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people believe these things fully or simply refuse to insult the possibility. In uncertain lives, leaving room for omens is a kind of caution. You remember, too, the sayings tied to the year itself. If the first frost bites before the last apples fall, winter will be sharp. If mist sits low over the fields at dawn and does not lift quickly, expect damp. If oak breaks leaf before ash, there will be a dry summer. If ash before oak, expect soaking ground and long complaints. No one can quite agree whether these rules always hold, but they are repeated anyway, as faithfully as prayers and perhaps with equal hope. A peasant life trains the mind to collect scraps of order wherever order can be found. As you cross the track, you notice a line of crows settling on the far hedge, each black shape turned into the wind. Their presence earns comments at once. Crows always do. To some they are merely thieves with feathers. To others they are little judges, too clever to be trusted and too ordinary to fear openly. One man says crows gathering before mid-afternoon mean bad weather. Another says they mean spilled grain somewhere and nothing more. A third mutters that if crows wish to deliver useful prophecies, they might at least do so without eating the seed first. That is likely the most practical view. The afternoon's work resumes in fits and rhythms, turning earth where needed, clearing, lifting, moving along the strips with the body's obedient resentment. But the mind keeps one part of itself free for the sky. That is the farmer's constant split. Your hands belong to the task before you. Your thoughts hover over the ditch where water runs too high, the cloud bank beyond the manor wood, the smell on the wind, the way the air has changed since morning. Labour does not cancel worry. It only gives worry something to stand beside. A little later you pass near the hedgerow and catch the sharp green scent of crushed leaves underfoot, mixed with the darker smell of damp soil freshly disturbed. Somewhere nearby someone has trodden wild thyme or yarrow into the path. Such plants do not merely belong to the margins of the field, they belong to the household chest, the physic bundle, the whispered remedy. Yarrow for staunching blood, mugwort for women's troubles or troubled sleep, plantain leaf on a sore foot, willow bark steeped for pain, garlic against corruption in the body, and perhaps, if people are feeling ambitious, against corruption of a more invisible kind. In the countryside, the boundary between medicine and superstition wears thin. A younger boy working near you pauses to rub his wrist where the tool handle has worn him raw. An older woman glances at it, spits lightly into the palm of her hand, rubs it with a little crushed herb from her pouch, and tells him not to whine because the saints have heard worse. The remedy may help, or the pressure of her hand may help, or simple embarrassment may do the rest. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what cures most country pains: the herb, the charm, the prayer, the rest, or the plain stubbornness of people who cannot afford to stay ill. From farther down the strip comes the sound of a discussion already ripening into dispute. Not anger exactly, but that familiar village edge where opinion grows elbows. It concerns weather, naturally. One man insists the halo seen around the moon last night means rain within 2 days. Another says the moon also looked blurred because he had drunk enough ale to blur a bishop. The reply arrives immediately that ale does not put rings around the moon unless the moon has been drinking too. It is not the finest exchange ever offered to civilization, but it passes for afternoon wit among people who've spent the day in wet boots. Still signs gather. The air feels heavier for a while and then lighter again. Rooks rise suddenly from the stubble and wheel as one dark mind over the field. The leaves of the poplars beyond the lane flash their pale undersides in the breeze, which some swear means rain is turning itself around somewhere just out of sight. You sniff the wind more than once and get that faint mineral scent that sometimes precedes weather, though perhaps you imagine it because everyone else is already smelling it too. A village can persuade itself of coming rain with remarkable efficiency. This constant reading of signs is not mere quaintness. It is economy, memory, fear, and hope dressed in country language. A man who owns little cannot afford not to speculate. A woman counting sacks in the store chest thinks of cloud patterns differently from a lord watching from a gallery. If hay lies cut, rain is disaster. If seed waits, moisture is blessing. If lambs are weak, a cold turn becomes grief. The weather is never simply nice or poor. It is always attached to consequences. At the edge of the strip you straighten and look toward the church tower. The stone stands pale against the afternoon, and below it the village seems almost peaceful from here. Roofs low, smoke lifting, children moving like small dark stitches along the lane. But the peace is threaded through with calculation. How much barley remains? How long until the next rent will the Lord press hard at harvest? Will the hens lay well? Has that cough worsened in the cottage near the ford? Has the roof by the cooper's yard been patched before the next real downpour? Peasant life teaches you to carry 6 futures at once, each one balanced on a cloud or a rumour. Somewhere near the boundary ditch stands a little weathered post with a scrap of cloth tied to it, faded almost colourless now. It may mark nothing more official than a remembered turning point in the field, or perhaps once it was tied there during Rogation tide, when the bounds were blessed and the parish walked the edges asking heaven to keep the crops. Such rituals matter because they give shape to uncertainty. You cannot command the rain, but you can process around the field, sing litanies, beat the bounds into memory, and make a solemn show of not being entirely helpless. Whether the heavens listen is another matter. No one can quite agree whether the old customs work because God favours orderly prayer, because saints enjoy attention, or because human beings feel less afraid when they have done something with their fear. The crops, as usual, do not explain themselves. By mid-afternoon the light softens strangely, not darker, but flatter, and several heads rise at once. There it is, a bank of cloud thickening beyond the woods, its leading edge low and dense. Not a storm perhaps, not yet, but enough to tighten mouths and sharpen pace. You feel it in the field immediately. People work a little quicker without admitting why. Tools bite deeper, bundles are moved sooner, a team is shifted with fewer wasted words. Rain may or may not come, but the possibility of it already enters the labour like a supervisor. You know this feeling well now, even if only by one day's immersion. Farming is not a set of isolated chores. It is a long negotiation with uncertainty. The sky is partner and enemy, blessing and threat. Every sign is noted because every sign might matter. The colour of the dawn, the ring round the moon, the flight of birds, the ache in old joints, the smell before evening, the drift of smoke, the muttering of an old woman who dreamt of red cattle in water. It all joins the record. And so you labour on under that changing sky, half in the furrow and half in thought, while the wind shifts once more across your face and carries with it the oldest country message of all: watch closely, because nothing here stays certain for long. The weather waits at the edge of the afternoon without yet deciding to commit, and perhaps because the sky has already offered enough uncertainty for one day. The next summons comes from a source much less mysterious, and usually less merciful. Word passes along the strip in the ordinary village way, not formally announced so much as carried from mouth to mouth. Until it becomes unavoidable, there is business at the manor court, not for everyone, not all at once, but enough to draw several of you from the fields and toward that other great labour of peasant life, the labour of standing still while authority arranges itself into sentences. So you leave the open ground and make your way with others along the lane that curves toward the manor enclosure. The track is more deeply rutted here, worn by carts bearing grain, wood, dung, rent, complaint, and all the small practical sorrows of village dependence. On one side the hedges run ragged and thick, on the other the ditches catch a dull sheet of sky. Ahead rises the manor house and its outbuildings. Not a castle, not some towering fantasy of banners and trumpets, but a place of timber, stone, yard, gate, and storehouse, shaped to remind everyone nearby that power does not need to be dramatic to be effective. The gate stands open. Men and women pass through in twos and threes, their boots caked in field earth, their sleeves rough, their expressions composed into that careful plainness people wear when they mean to say as little as possible, while hearing as much as necessary. A dog lies near the entrance and watches everyone with bored intelligence. You suspect, not for the first time, that dogs understand hierarchy perfectly well and simply prefer not to discuss it. Inside the manor yard, things are cleaner than in the village lanes, though not by enough to become suspicious. A cart is propped near a shed. A stack of firewood has been arranged with the kind of order that suggests servants were told to make it look orderly for people whose own wood piles usually resemble arguments with gravity. A few hens scratch in the straw near the stable wall. Somewhere out of sight a horse stamps, and the sharper, richer smell of horses mingles with damp timber, old hay, and the faint sourness of stored grain. The court itself is held in a hall or chamber, plain enough in furnishing yet weighty in meaning. You step inside and the light changes at once, softened by the walls, narrowed by shuttered openings, made warmer by a fire that serves both comfort and display. The rushes on this floor are fresher than at home. The boards creak less. There's a table set at the front, a bench or two for those permitted to sit, and enough empty space left open that everyone else knows precisely where to stand. Authority always takes care to arrange the room before arranging the people. You take your place among the others and wait. Waiting is one of the manor court's most refined arts. You wait while the steward or bailiff confers with another official. You wait while names are sorted, dues recalled, prior disputes remembered, and the order of grievances constructed with all the solemnity of liturgy and rather less mercy. You wait while a clerk, if one is present, dips pen to ink and scratches notes in a hand quicker than any field labourer's fingers could comfortably imitate. Ink-stained scribes are a different sort of worker altogether. Their day bends over parchment rather than furrow, but they too leave the evening with crooked backs and darkened hands, merely in a more prestigious colour. At the far end of the room the steward clears his throat, and the small stir of voices falls away. He is not a grand man in appearance, perhaps, but he sits where sitting matters. That is enough. The reeve stands nearby, known to you all, part neighbour and part instrument. The living reminder that village life and manor law are braided together whether anyone likes the pattern or not. The business begins. A boundary dispute comes first. Of course it does. Boundaries are to peasant life what theology is to monks, endless, intricate, and liable to become heated over marks invisible to outsiders. One man swears his neighbour shifted a marker stone after the last rain softened the ditch. The neighbour swears the stone has stood where it is since before either of them had enough beard to make mistakes with confidence. Witnesses are called, and each witness carries not only memory but allegiance, friendship, old insult, and the general human tendency to see things most clearly when they occurred on someone else's land. No one can quite agree whether the stone moved by hand, by weather, or by long familiarity misremembered as certainty. The steward listens with the expression of a man who has heard every possible version of mud acquiring legal significance. Then comes a matter of unpaid hens, or perhaps a rent in oats not fully rendered, or labour service missed on a day someone claims was lost to illness. This is the manor court's true atmosphere, not thunderous judgment, but accumulated obligation. A peasant world runs on grain measures, strips, fines, attendance, dues, and remembered custom. You can feel the weight of custom in the room more heavily than the smoke. It hangs over every exchange. What is owed? What was always done? What must be done now because it was done before? The law here is not abstract. It is local, repetitive, and deeply familiar, which somehow makes it more wearing. When one woman explains that her son missed a Labour Day because fever took him so hard he could barely stand, the steward asks whether proof was offered at the time. It is a very official sort of question to ask of a fever, as though illness ought to present itself politely at the manor door and request notation. A murmur passes through the room and vanishes just as quickly. Everyone knows the game. Misfortune may be pitied, but it is still measured against obligation. The fines are not always ruinous, but they are never welcome. A few pennies here, a measure of grain there, an extra day's labour, a warning given the full shape of a threat without the inconvenience of louder words. It is the slow pressure that defines the court more than spectacle does. You watch a man bow his head and accept a ruling that clearly tastes bitter in his mouth, because bitterness is cheaper than defiance and far less likely to produce further charges. When your own household's matter is called, your stomach tightens in a way no pottage can help. Perhaps it concerns a due not yet settled, or a shared obligation over ploughing service, or a question of gleaning rights and who entered which strip too soon after harvest last season. Whatever the precise matter, it is small enough to sound trivial to a noble chronicler, and large enough to trouble a peasant household for weeks. That is the scale on which ordinary life is governed. You step forward, keeping your face composed, and answer what is asked. Yes, the strip was worked. Yes, the service was rendered. Yes, the cart was unavailable because the wheel cracked. And yes, the reeve was told, though whether he heard with his full soul at the time remains politely unspoken. A question comes, then another. Each one is simple if considered alone. Together they form that familiar narrowing of the path, where every answer must be both true enough and careful enough. You're not lying exactly. No one is, not openly. But neither is anyone handing the whole shape of their hardship to authority and expecting it to come back improved. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether manor courts are meant to keep order, squeeze profit, or simply reassure the powerful that every chicken, acre, and argument eventually bends in their direction. In practice, they do all three. A clerk writes something down. That scratching sound matters more than many prayers. Once written, a thing acquires weight, even if the parchment itself would make poor bedding and worse soup. Literacy in this room is not merely learning, it is power that survives the day. You feel that without needing to name it. The peasant voice speaks into air. The clerk's hand leaves a mark. By evening, one will linger in memory and the other in record. Around you, the room continues its slow procession of grievances and penalties. A widow petitions to keep a pig where another claims it rooted through a hedge. A tenant is warned for neglecting a drainage ditch that should have been cleared before the last heavy weather. Someone else must pay for brewing outside the manor custom, or for failing to use the Lord's mill if such rule binds here. Mildews especially have a way of souring tempers. Grain taken to the mill always seems to come back a little reduced, and the miller's honesty enjoys a reputation no fuller than the flour sacks. Some swear millers keep half a saint in one pocket and half the village in the other. You stand through it all and begin to understand that the manor court is its own kind of fieldwork. It ploughs through the village's hidden roots, envy, debt, memory, custom, need. It turns them up in public and leaves them exposed. A quarrel that might have stayed a mutter over a hedge becomes an official matter once spoken here. A missing hen becomes evidence. A boundary stone becomes fate. A missed Labour Day becomes a line in a record. Even silence becomes noticeable. People who say little at court are often discussed after, because quiet can mean prudence, guilt, contempt, exhaustion, or all four. And yet the court is not merely oppression dressed in boards and benches. It is also where village life formally recognizes itself. Transfers are noted, death duties remembered, inheritances, small and sorrowful, are acknowledged. Widows secure holdings if custom permits. New tenants are entered. The same machinery that presses also records, and in that recording lies a harsh sort of belonging. To be named here is to be caught, yes, but also to exist in the woven order of the place. At length your own matter is settled, not triumphantly. Nothing in the manor court ends triumphantly unless one is seated at the table, but it ends bearably. A warning, perhaps. a small due reaffirmed, a future obligation made plain in the old dry language that suggests fairness while carefully preserving advantage, you step back among the others, the tension leaving your shoulders by degrees rather than all at once. By now the light at the shutter has changed again. Afternoon has begun to slope toward evening, though there is plenty of labour yet before rest can be imagined honestly. One by one, people leave the hall with their rulings, their muttered interpretations, their renewed grievances, their reliefs too modest to show. Outside in the yard, the air feels larger after the chamber's close authority. You breathe in damp wind, horse smell, and wood smoke as though they were freedoms. The sky still threatens weather somewhere beyond sight. The fields still need hands. The cottage still waits with its small repairs and smaller comforts. But you walk out of the manor gate carrying one more truth of the farmer's life, that the day is not only spent in mud and labour, but also in standing before power while it decides how much of your hardship counts. And then, because there is nothing else for it, you turn back toward the village and the work that has been patiently waiting for you the whole time. When you leave the manor yard, the afternoon feels at once thinner and more restless, as if being measured by officials has somehow shortened the daylight. The sky has not yet committed to rain, though the clouds beyond the woods remain thick enough to keep one eye on. The lane back toward the village is lively now in that practical, unsentimental way of places where no one has the leisure to stroll without purpose. A cart creaks ahead of you under sacks and baskets. 2 children run beside it until they are shouted back from the wheel. A woman with a bundle of cloth tucked under one arm walks briskly in the opposite direction, already carrying the look of someone who has 4 tasks waiting and resents only 3 of them. You fall into step with the movement toward market. Not every day is market day, of course, and not every household has enough to spare for trade, but when the chance comes, even a small journey to the market town or village green has the feel of crossing briefly into a wider world. The very road changes the mind. The footpath that usually binds cottage to field to byre now stretches outward past hedges, shrines, toll points, and strangers' doors. For a farmer, such distance does not erase labour. It simply dresses labour in a different cloak. You carry what your household can spare, and spare is a word handled carefully in peasant life. A basket of eggs, perhaps, if the hens have shown unusual goodwill. A little butter wrapped in cloth, some onions, dried beans, a measure of barley, a bit of flax, a chicken trussed with more dignity than it ever possessed alive. Perhaps not much, perhaps only enough to exchange for salt, iron nails, lamp oil, a scrap of decent cloth, or the kind of small necessary thing that no household seems to own until the moment it badly needs one. Medieval markets are built as much on modest exchanges as on grand commerce. The world turns not only on wagon loads of wool, but on one woman trading eggs for soap, and a man trying to pretend he can wait another month before buying leather thongs for a harness repair. The road out of the village is damp underfoot, grooved by wheels and bordered by hawthorn and hazel, their branches still bare or only just stirring with the season. Water sits in the deeper ruts, reflecting a pale, uncertain sky. Here and there, the track narrows between banks where old roots knot through the earth. Beyond the hedges lie strips of worked land, pasture, and the occasional patch of scrub where goats seem determined to make a philosophy out of poor grazing. You walk with others because roads are better shared, and because anyone carrying goods prefers companions, if only as witnesses against misfortune. At the bend where the lane meets the broader road, there stands a small roadside shrine tucked beneath an ash tree. It is only a niche in stone. Perhaps, or a wooden shelter darkened by weather, holding a painted saint whose face has long since softened into guesswork. Someone has left a little bunch of withered flowers there, tied with thread. Someone else has wedged a beeswax stub into the crack below the image, though it has long since burned down. You pause, like several others, not dramatically, just enough to nod, cross yourself, or touch the wood with 2 fingers. A farmer on the road does not always ask for miracles. Often you ask for smaller mercies, no broken wheel, no theft, fair weights, tolerable weather, and a horse that does not suddenly develop opinions. Some swear roadside shrines are safest respected when passing with goods, because saints notice trade as keenly as they notice prayer. Others say the shrine matters less than the habit of stopping. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the comfort lies in the holy image itself or in the small human act of acknowledging that the road has hazards no bundle of onions can negotiate alone. Farther along, the road grows busier. You begin to meet people from other villages, identifiable by cloak, accent, or the subtle local pride with which they pretend their mud is different from yours. A man with 2 geese under his arm nods grimly as if transporting royalty. A woman drives a lean pig forward with a switch and the patient fury of someone who has had this exact argument with livestock before. A pair of boys carry baskets suspended from a pole between them and look simultaneously miserable and proud. One passing traveller wears a pilgrim badge pinned to his hat, stamped in pewter with the sign of some shrine you do not immediately recognise. Pilgrim badges travel far in this world, dangling from hats and cloaks like small metallic stories. Some are true proof of pious journeying. Some, perhaps, are bought with more enthusiasm than pilgrimage itself required. No one can quite agree whether every traveller who claims to have kissed a relic truly reached the shrine in question, but the badge shines all the same. As the road broadens toward the market settlement, you pass a toll point little more than a gate, perhaps, or a post and chain, with a man nearby whose posture suggests that other people's burdens are his favourite thing to count. Market tolls are among those facts of life too irritating to be surprising. You pay to pass, or your lord pays, or some custom decides who owes what. But one way or another, someone always appears eager to extract a little coin, or produce merely because movement has occurred. Commerce in the Middle Ages, like weather, seems to generate officials naturally. The tollman eyes the baskets, the bundles, the bird under one woman's arm, the sack on another man's shoulder. He makes his calculations with the practised boredom of a person who has long since stopped being moved by pleading. A few muttered words pass. A coin changes hands, or a portion is noted, or perhaps a familiar villager's due is waved through under remembered arrangement. There is always a little tension here, because market hopes are slender things. Lose too much at the gate, and the day sours before it has begun. Beyond the toll, the market reveals itself by stages before you properly see it. First, the sound cart wheels over packed earth, the rise and fall of bargaining voices, a burst of laughter, a sharp call advertising fish, the clatter of wooden pails set down, the snort of a horse annoyed by everyone. Then the smell trampled straw, damp wool, onions, smoke, leather, river mud if the place lies near water, a flash of spices from a richer stall, frying fat from somewhere better patronised than your conscience recommends, then colour, not bright like a noble's tapestry, but varied enough after fields and cottages to feel almost festive dyed hoods, striped cloth, copper pans catching light, red apples in a basket, blue ribbons too dear to be sensible, glazed jugs, yellow cheese, green herbs tied in bunches, feathers, hides, ropes, and wooden bowls stacked in patient towers. For a moment, standing at the edge of it, you feel the old peasant contradiction stir. This is not your world, and yet it is. The market belongs to everyone and to whoever can afford the stall fee and the sharper tongue. It gathers lords' men, peasants, chapmen, petty traders, craftsmen, carriers, widows with eggs, boys with geese, women with butter, clerks, tinkers, and the occasional person whose boots are too fine for honest trust. The wider world does not arrive here in grand speeches. It arrives in prices. You edge into the square or green and find a place among the others from your village. Goods are set out. Cloth is unfolded. Baskets are arranged to flatter their contents, a practice as old as selling. The chicken in your company's care looks offended by its own commercial significance. Nearby, a fishmonger bellows the virtues of fish that smell persuasive only if one's standards were buried some time ago. A seller of cheap pins and ribbons has already drawn a knot of interested girls, each pretending merely to be passing. Trade begins with looking, then touching, then the cautious exchange of remarks meant to sound casual and reveal everything. How much for the salt? Too much. These eggs are small. So is your sense of gratitude. The flax is good. It was better before the rain. These onions have seen fresher mornings. So have we all. Bargaining in market speech is half arithmetic, half theatre, and entirely necessary. No one wishes to be cheated. Everyone suspects they are being cheated. This keeps commerce lively. You move from stall to stall as needed, weighing what can be given against what must be brought home. Salt matters, iron matters, needles matter, a little lamp oil or tallow matters, a strip of leather, a better cord, a wooden spoon, a shard of glazed ware if fortune has become uncharacteristically sentimental. Every purchase is a judgment against some future want. If you buy the nails, can you still manage the salt? If you take the better cloth now, what happens when the cart harness gives way? If you skip soap, how long before the whole household smells like a moral warning? At one stall a peddler displays little charms alongside needles and combs tiny lead saints, scraps of parchment with prayers, bits of coloured glass meant to hang by the bed or by the bier. Some swear such things protect children from the evil eye, or keep fever from settling in a house already tired of burying people. Others say the peddler's own health seems suspiciously robust for a man trafficking in miracle trinkets. Yet customers buy all the same, in uncertain lives. Even doubtful hope has market value. A monk passes through the edge of the crowd with a basket for alms, or perhaps books and indulgent glances, depending on the order and the day. Two men nearby lower their voices at once, not from guilt, exactly, but from instinct. A relic is being discussed at a stall farther off. Some fragment said to have come from a saint no one local has properly heard of, though the seller describes it with such conviction that several listeners nod as if memory is returning to them. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether relics come to market because faith travels, or because commerce can smell reverence from 3 villages away. As the afternoon wears on, clouds continue to gather at the edge of the sky, and this too becomes part of trade. Buyers hurry a little, sellers glance upward between customers. A woman securing butter in cloth says she must be on the road before the rain, or the path by the ford will turn wicked. Another man decides against staying for one more bargain because his donkey is old and stubborn, a combination best not tested in weather. Markets may tempt, but roads home always get the final word. You finish what business you can, salt obtained, nails, perhaps a bit of cord, maybe a needle precious enough to wrap carefully and mention twice when home. Perhaps even something small and almost foolish, a ribbon scrap or a better buckle, though such luxuries in a peasant basket always carry the feeling of mild criminality. You tuck them away with the seriousness they deserve. Little things keep households going. Little things also remind tired people they are not beasts of burden only. Then the row calls again. Goods lighter in some places, heavier in others. You turn from the market's clamour back toward the narrowing lane, the toll, the shrine, the fields, the waiting cottage. Behind you, voices still rise, prices still battle, and the broader world continues its brief brush against your life. Ahead, mud and duty resume their more familiar hold. That is the quiet temptation of market day. For an hour or two, the world seems wider than the manor boundary and more various than field, byre, and hearth. Then you carry your purchases home and discover, with admirable consistency, that even the wider world eventually turns into repairs, supper, and tomorrow's work. By the time you leave the market road behind, the day has begun to draw inward. Not yet dusk, not properly, but the long outward-facing stretch of afternoon has turned back toward the village, toward walls, sheds, lofts, and the practical little urgencies that gather wherever human beings and animals attempt to survive under one roof line, and a season's worth of uncertainty. Your basket carries the small proofs of market business salt wrapped carefully. Nails that seem too important for their size, perhaps a length of cord, a needle tucked where it cannot vanish, and one or two things that are not exactly luxuries but might, if described generously, count as mercies. The lane home is muddier than before, as if the road resents commerce and wishes to reclaim everyone into honest peasant inconvenience. Clouds still hover beyond the fields, holding their rain in a manner that feels almost personal. The wind has shifted again, and now smells of damp hedges and cold earth, with that faint green bitterness that comes when crushed leaves and wet bark share the same air. Around you the others walk more quietly than they did on the way out. A journey to market produces a brief widening of the spirit, but the return narrows it again. Every purchased thing has already become a task. The nails belong to a hinge, the cord belongs to a harness, the salt belongs to the pot. Even the thought of soap or cloth becomes, in the mind, less adornment than duty postponed until now. As the cottages come back into view, smoke lies lower over the village, and the sounds have changed. Morning is full of beginnings. Evening belongs to mending. A hammer taps somewhere near the smithy lane. A child is crying with the weary outrage reserved for the hour when hunger and exhaustion discover one another. A hen protests being gathered. A gate thumps shut. From one yard comes the dry, repeated rasp of someone sawing wood that should have been cut 2 days ago but was not, because 2 days ago there were 12 other urgencies behaving exactly the same way. You step into the yard and at once the smaller kingdom of the household closes around you. The animals must be seen to again, because livestock possess the annoying and undeniable habit of requiring care every day, including the days when humans have already had quite enough. The byre smells warmer now than it did at dawn, thick with straw, manure, hide, and that close animal breath that seems to fill every beam and shadow. The cow shifts her weight when you enter. A goat gives you the look of one who has been personally wronged by the entire passage of time. Chickens fuss and rearrange themselves with theatrical complaint, as if you are asking them to surrender a throne rather than accept grain and confinement. You set down your market things indoors and come back with feed. The tasks are small, repetitive, entirely necessary. Scatter grain, refill water, check the latch, lift a hoof if needed, run a hand along a flank to judge warmth, stiffness, health. In a peasant household, you learn to notice changes quickly because changes become losses very fast. A cow off its feed, a hen gone listless, a pig favouring one leg, a sheep coughing oddly. These are not passing curiosities. They are warnings written in flesh. Near the shed door, one of the younger ones from the household is holding a chicken with grave incompetence, while an older woman examines the bird's comb and mutters that it looks pale. She suggests garlic in the mash, or perhaps chopped nettle when next the growth comes in, and then adds that old Mabel by the ford swears by a charm spoken over the water trough on St. Blaise's Day. No one can quite agree whether a charm helps the bird or only comforts the person who would otherwise stand uselessly fretting over poultry, but comfort in a life full of animals and weather is rarely dismissed merely because it cannot be measured. You remember, too, the little knowledge scattered through the village like loose seed, herbs hanging in bundles under eaves, goose grease kept in a pot for cracked skin, chest rubs, and at least 3 other remedies depending on who is listing them. Dried comfrey for bruises, pennyroyal discussed in lowered voices, honey saved for sore throats or bad wounds if the household can spare it, leeches, if things grow serious enough and someone knows a person who knows a person with a jar. Medieval medicine is half observation, half inheritance, half prayer, which is already too many halves. But country life has never been strict with arithmetic where survival is concerned. Inside the cottage, the light has shifted toward gold and smoke. The fire is rebuilt. The pot has been moved. Someone is already sorting what came back from market with the concentration of a clerk settling royal revenue. Salt goes high and dry. Nails are counted twice. The new cord is tested with suspicious fingers, because trust in bought goods is a luxury poorer people seldom indulge. The needle, if there is one, becomes almost a sacred object at once, admired, tucked away, and mentally assigned to repairs already waiting in line. The board near the wall holds a broken buckle, a torn sleeve, a basket handle coming loose, and the old grievance of the cartwheel still leaning in the yard. Home welcomes purchases the way the sea welcomes ships by demanding immediate unloading. You kneel near the threshold to look at a cracked wooden rake and a worn leather strap that has finally admitted defeat. The leather is stiff in one place, split in another, and held together for the moment by faith and habit. You thread the new cord through where it can help, pulling tight, knotting, testing. It is not elegant, but elegance rarely gets invited to a peasant evening. Function is the guest of honour. Nearby, someone uses one of the new nails to secure a loosened board by the chest. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike is small, but in such houses small sounds are the music of continuance. Above you hangs a cluster of dried herbs from the beam, their edges crisp in the hearth warmth. Sage, maybe, thyme, mugwort, something bitter enough to be good for worms, or fevers, or the idea of either. A child asks whether the herb bundle near the bed truly keeps nightmares away. The answer comes from across the room in the old style some swear that it does, which is not yes, not no, and entirely medieval in its usefulness. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether nightmares fear herbs, saints, smoke, or simply a full stomach and less draught under the door. Still, the bundle hangs there, and perhaps that is proof enough. There is a foot to be looked at as well. Yours, or someone else's, rubbed raw from damp leather and long walking. Boots in this world are less a solution than an ongoing negotiation. You sit on a low stool while another pair of hands, rough and practical, examines the heel and mutters disapproval at your choices, the weather and leather in general. A salve is produced from a little crock, smelling of tallow, herbs, and determined hope. The sore place is cleaned, anointed, wrapped in linen if there is linen to spare, and given stern instructions to behave better tomorrow. Medieval folk cures rarely lack confidence. A remedy may fail quietly, but it is almost always applied with authority. Not far away, an older man is shaving a new peg for a broken hinge with a knife that has seen more sharpening than luxury. Wood curls onto the floor. Each movement is measured. Each shaving matters. Beside him lies a small pile of objects waiting their turn, a cracked spoon, a wicker basket with one side loosening, a child's wooden shoe split at the sole, the iron hook from the hearth slightly bent. A noble hall may dream of tapestries and silver. A peasant house dreams of things not breaking all at once. And over it all hangs the knowledge of winter, even if winter is not yet at the door. Every repair in a farming household is shadowed by future weather. A loose board is not merely a loose board. It is a draught in the cold months. A weak latch is not merely an annoyance. It is trouble when storms come. A leaky roof is not merely wet now. It is rot later. Winter storehouses live in the mind all year long. The sacks of grain, the dried peas, the onions hung in braid, the smoked fish, the ale cask. The salted bits of pork, if fortune has smiled once or twice, these are counted mentally whenever a nail is driven or a hinge mended. Someone mentions that the store basket in the loft should be checked for mice. Another says the dried apples must be moved farther from damp. A third insists the turnips will not last if left near the wall that catches rain. Household management at day's end is not separate from farming. It is farming turned inward. The field may grow the crop, but the loft, chest, rack, beam, and shelf decide whether the crop still exists in February. The dog, naturally, has returned. It sits in the doorway as if auditing the repairs. A child offers it a scrap and is warned not to spoil the creature. The warning is given in a tone suggesting the creature has already been spoiled by all available parties for years. The dog takes its crust with the grave dignity of a monk accepting alms. Its fur smells faintly of wet leaves and road dust. It turns once by the door and lies down exactly where everyone will have to step around it. This is a skill village dogs cultivate to perfection. The light continues thinning. Outside, the cloud bank never quite breaks, but the village has already made its peace with evening whether rain comes or not. Smoke thickens under the rafters. Firelight steadies. The sounds from neighbouring cottages soften into that muffled twilight pattern of doors closing. Voices dropping, tools being set down one by one. Somewhere farther off, a child laughs suddenly and then stops. Somewhere else a cow lows, deep and patient. From the lane comes a brief exchange about a charm for swollen joints involving boiled nettles, and a prayer to a saint whose name half the speakers pronounce differently. Even now, it is hard to tell whether what keeps a medieval household together is skill, faith, thrift, repetition, or sheer refusal to let disorder have the last word. Perhaps it is all of them. Perhaps survival is always made of several truths bound together like a bundle of herbs over the fire, useful, symbolic, fragrant when crushed, and never entirely one thing. You finish tying off the cord on the strap and flex it once. It will hold for now. In a peasant life, for now is often the highest grade of success available. The hinge is reset, the salve is capped, the nails are tucked away. The chicken, after much gloomy examination, appears likely to survive at least until tomorrow, which is all anyone can ask with confidence. The room warms, the fire glows, and your hands carry the ache of useful work rather than field labour alone. This, too, is part of why the farmer's life never really ends. Even when the field releases you, the household takes over. Bodies need tending, animals need watching, tools need mending, food needs storing, doors need fastening, straw needs turning, remedies need remembering. The day does not stop, it changes rooms. And as evening settles more firmly over the village, you find yourself deep in that inward labour, stitching together the little frail walls and creatures and objects by which an entire life manages, somehow, to continue. By the time the repairs settle into place and the household's smaller emergencies agree to wait their turn until morning, evening has laid a cooler hand across the village. The last of the daylight lingers in the western sky as a pale thinning above the hedges. But down at the level where you live among yard gates, byre doors, smoke-black beams, and mud-stiff boots, the day has already begun folding itself inward. Firelight grows more important than the sun. Sounds carry differently. A cough from the next cottage seems nearer. A pail set down in the lane rings sharper. Somewhere a latch drops with a finality that says one family has decided the outside world may now conduct its business without them. You stand for a moment in the doorway and look toward the little store space, the loft, the hooks, the shelves, the hanging braids of onion, the sacks and baskets and jars that together represent the true measure of a peasant household's hope. This is the hour when a farmer's mind turns most naturally to reckoning, not grand reckoning, not the sort that kings commission into rolls and clerks into parchment, but the older, quieter arithmetic of survival. How much grain remains? How much salted meat? How many beans? Whether the apples are beginning to soften, whether the turnips near the cool wall have held, whether damp has crept into the sack by the chest, whether the mice have been at the oats again. Every household carries its own calendar, and it is often counted less by feast days than by what is left in the bins. The memory of harvest presses especially close at this hour. It always does. Even in a season when the fields still work under your hands, the mind of the farmer loops back toward the months when the grain stood high or failed, when hay was cut, when rain threatened the ricks, when carts groaned in and out of the yard under the weight of what the land had permitted. A peasant life never eats a meal without also consuming memory. Every bowl of pottage carries last summer inside it. Every loaf contains a weather pattern from months ago. You climb the short ladder or steps toward the loft where part of the household's winter store is kept. The air up there is cooler, drier in spots, dustier in others. It smells of grain, old wood, onions, wool, and the faint sourness of things long stored but still sound. A sack is tested with the hand, pressed, lifted slightly, listened to. That is another peasant skill rarely sung about the ability to judge a season's future by touch. You can tell a grain sack too damp by its heaviness, a bin too empty by how quickly the hand reaches wood beneath, a basket of apples too far gone by scent before sight confirms it. You untie one sack and let the grain run slowly between your fingers. Barley, perhaps, or oats. Dry enough, thank God, though not so abundant as to invite carelessness. Nearby hangs a little bundle of dried peas. A shelf holds onions braided and suspended, their skins whispering softly against one another when the air shifts. Turnips sit in a straw-lined corner, humble and earth-scented, the sort of food that no poet praises until winter teaches him manners. A pot of salt, covered carefully. A little crock of fat, maybe smoked fish wrapped and hung where cats and damp alike will find the arrangement insulting. This is not wealth, but it is the shape of protection. It is the wall between your household and the coldest version of the year, Below, someone calls up to ask how the apples fare, and you answer with the grave authority such questions deserve. A few soft. That alone can alter a week's meals. Bad fruit must be used first, cooked down, dried if possible, fed to pigs if not. Nothing is ever merely going off. It is becoming a decision. You think of other winters spoken of in the village. The hard one when the trough froze so thick men used mallets at dawn. The hungry one when bread was stretched with peas, beans, oat chaff, and ground acorns, and still called bread only by Christian generosity. The year wet weather rotted hay, and people watched their beasts go lean before Candlemas. Some swear there was once a winter when wolves came close enough to the far pasture that you could hear them by moonlight. Others say it was only dogs gone wild and memory grown theatrical with age. No one can quite agree whether such tales worsen with retelling or merely become more honest. You descend again and find the household gathered into its evening pattern. Firelight pulses against the walls. Steam rises from the pot. A child has fallen half asleep where they sit and blink slowly at nothing. Someone is trimming a wick. Someone else is rubbing tired hands before the flames. Your own body, now that the field work and repairs have run their course, seems to become aware of itself in section shoulders first, then spine, then the long honest complaint of feet. Fatigue at this hour is not sudden, it spreads like dusk. Yet the mind does not fully rest. It turns, again and again, to winter fear, not panic. Peasants cannot afford dramatic panic every evening, or they would never finish supper. No, it is a steadier thing, woven into habit like thread into cloth. The knowledge that a household lives on the edge of enough, that the bins can look full in autumn and conversational by late January. That illness in a beast, a wet summer, a spoiled cask, a poor yield from one strip, a levy pressed too hard. A roof neglected too long, any one of these can turn a manageable season into a sharp one. The evening meal reflects this same truth. Pottage again, perhaps, but altered by what must be used. Some onions softening, a handful of dried peas, a cabbage head losing its firmness, bread sliced thinner than one would prefer and shared without comment. Maybe a scrap of smoked meat shaved in so finely it seasons the imagination as much as the broth. The meal is warm, and that matters. Warmth changes the spirit of scarcity. As you eat, someone near the hearth recalls a past harvest when the grain came in under clear skies and dry carts, and all thought themselves briefly secure. Another answers with the memory of a year when rain would not stop, when every sheaf seemed half water and every conversation ended with eyes turned upward in resentment. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which was worse, the year of too much rain, the year of too little, or the year when the crop looked promising until a sickness passed through the village and labour itself became too scarce to gather what the land had offered. Farming teaches an almost theological respect for contingency. A woman across from you turns one of the onions in her hand and says her mother always claimed onions hung near the bed. Keep fever away in winter. Someone else says they keep fever away from everyone except the person sleeping nearest the onion. A small laugh rises. Tired, brief, genuine. Even winter fear has room for one dry joke before bed, provided it does not require standing. The conversation wanders, as evening talk does, from stores to memories to forecasts and back again. Whether the Lord will press hard this year, whether the tithe will feel heavier because the bin feels lighter, whether the bean patch may do better next season if dung is spread deeper, whether the pig should be slaughtered before frost or held longer in hope of more fat. Such decisions are never abstract. They are made in rooms like this, by tired people over simple suppers. with smoke in their hair and numbers in their heads. On a beam above the hearth hangs a little charm of twigs bound with faded thread. It may have been set there for luck at last harvest, or for protection in childbirth, or simply because someone once said it ought to hang there, and no one has yet found reason to insult the arrangement. Some swear certain charms keep blight from the grain if brought from the field at Lammas. Others mutter that proper storage and a dry loft help more than any saint's knot, even now. It is hard to tell where prudence ends and ritual begins. In practice, most households prefer both. You notice, too, how every object in the room has become part of this long winter thinking. The wool blanket folded by the pallet, the fur-lined cloak patched at the shoulder, the beeswax candle saved for a holy day or a true emergency, while poorer tallow lights do the daily smoking. The iron key to the chest, the oak door with its stubborn latch, the wooden bowl whose crack has been bound, the rushes on the floor waiting to be renewed before deep cold. A peasant house survives not by one grand provision, but by 100 smaller preservations. Outside, the sky darkens fully. The cloud bank that threatened rain all afternoon has dissolved into a heavy overcast that swallows the stars. The village beyond your walls is reducing itself to points of fire and muffled movement. Here and there, a glow at a shutter crack, a voice in the lane, then less and less. The world contracts in winter-minded places. Roads shorten. Fields disappear into darkness. The household becomes both shelter and horizon. Somewhere in the talk, mention is made of last year's hunger in a neighbouring village, how they boiled nettles early and traded candlesticks for grain by February. Someone says a pilgrim passing through claimed the abbey, stored more than enough, but gave out little. Another says pilgrims claim many things when soup is desired. No one presses the matter. Hunger stories are listened to carefully, not because they are entertaining, but because they are maps of danger. You finish eating and hold the bowl a little while longer in your hands for warmth. The fire has burned lower, though someone will bank it carefully before sleep, covering the coals so morning can be coaxed back without wasting too much tinder. There is tenderness in that act, though no one would call it that. To save fire overnight is to save effort, warmth, time, and a little hope against the dark. This is the deeper lesson settling over you now. A farmer's life is not merely endless because the tasks repeat. It is endless because every season lives inside the next. Harvest sits at the supper board in winter. Winter fear rides in the cart at harvest. Memory seasons the pot. Worry sleeps in the loft beside the grain. There is no clean boundary where one labour ends and another begins. The field follows you indoors, and the winter follows you even in summer. The room grows quieter. Spoons are set aside. The child at last slips fully asleep. Someone lays another bit of wood on the fire and watches it catch. Another reaches for the chest key. Another glances, without quite meaning to, toward the loft where the sacks sit in their dim patience. All of you live by what is stored, by what is remembered, by what is hoped for, and by what may yet go wrong. And in that warm, dim room, with the smell of smoke and onion and wool around you, the truth settles gently but firmly into your bones. The harvest is never really over, because the winter is always waiting to eat it. Even with winter fear sitting quietly in the corners of the room, the year does not pass in one unbroken line of toil. It pauses, now and then, for holy days, parish customs, little bursts of sanctioned brightness that interrupt labour without ever truly defeating it. That is where the evening carries you now, into the strange, familiar truth that medieval people rest not by leaving necessity behind, but by setting candles beside it and calling the pause a feast. The talk by the hearth drifts, as it often does when bowls are emptied and the fire begins to settle, toward the calendar of saints and the memories attached to it, not dates written in a book, not for most people here, but days felt in the body and village rhythm. Candlemas with its blessed lights against winter gloom, Lammas with the first loaf from new grain, Michaelmas with geese, rents, endings, reckonings, Martinmas with slaughter, salting, smoke, and the practical piety of preparing for cold. Rogation days with the bounds walked and fields blessed, when the parish trails out over tracks and grass, chanting litanies and asking heaven to look kindly on barley, oats, peas, and everyone obliged to eat them later. Feast days do not erase labour, they simply throw a little gold over it, the way shell gold catches the edge of a saint's robe in a manuscript without changing the parchment beneath. You remember, or hear remembered, those mornings when the bell sounds not only for work but for Mass, and people wash a little more thoroughly if weather and water permit, shake out the better cloak, comb hair with more ambition, and pin on whatever token or ribbon still holds some dignity. Even poverty has its ceremonial version. A patched wool sleeve brushed clean for church is still a kind of pride. You picture the village on such a morning, the lane fuller than usual, not with carts and tools, but with families moving together under cloaks, children scrubbed to the point of resentment, old men walking slower but with more visible intention, women carrying the serious expression of those determined to keep both reverence and household order intact in one outing. The church stands at the centre of it, stone cool even in better weather. The doorway dark until candles and bodies fill the space with motion, breath, wax, damp wool, and prayer. Inside, feast days smell different from ordinary evenings. More beeswax if the parish can afford it, because beeswax burns cleaner and sweeter than common tallow, and carries with it a faint sense that heaven may have better standards than the rest of you. Incense, perhaps, if this is a place with enough means or enough devotion to swing it properly. Wet cloak steaming slowly, rushes on the floor, fresher than at home if fortune has favoured the sacristan. Voices lowered, then raised. A cough politely suppressed. A baby choosing the exact holiest silence in which to object to existence. The priest, vested more splendidly than anyone listening, steps through the old words. Bells are rung, candles gleam. Images of saints look down with painted calm on people whose boots are drying in the porch and whose geese, beans, leaking roofs, and sore backs have not vanished merely because the liturgy says Gloria. That is the beauty of village religion. It does not belong to polished abstraction. It belongs to people who come in from mud and kneel anyway. Some feast days carry food with them as naturally as smoke follows fire. A little better bread if the stores allow, a pie, perhaps, on a truly generous occasion. Cheese set out with more ceremony than usual, ale drawn more freely. On certain days there may be roast goose for those who can manage it, or fish if custom requires abstinence, or oat cake sweetened with honey in a way that makes children stare as if witnessing a miracle. Even the poorest households try, when they can, to mark holy days with some difference from the ordinary. A day unmarked is hardly a feast at all, and yet even the feast has work folded into it. Before celebration comes cleaning, fetching, kneading, stirring, carrying, sweeping, borrowing, mending, warming, and reminding children not to wipe important fingers on already important cloth. A woman may spend half the day preparing for an evening others will later describe as cheerful. A man may slaughter, chop wood, draw ale, haul benches, and still be told, quite accurately, that more remains to be done. No one can quite agree whether feast days are rest with labour attached, or labour made bearable by the promise of song and extra broth. You hear the old customs recalled around the hearth now, how on certain nights the young men went about with greenery or lanterns, singing badly but earnestly, how at harvest thanksgiving a loaf shaped from the first grain might be blessed, admired, broken, and eaten with the solemnity of people who know bread deserves more respect than most lords. How children on St. Nicholas's Day looked in corners and on ledges with a level of hope usually reserved for spring. How on midsummer fires might be seen on higher ground, and people muttered that smoke from blessed flames carried luck over fields and cattle. Some swear leaping such fires guards health through the year. Others suggest it mainly guards the memory from becoming too dull. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what old customs belong to the church, what belong to grandmothers, and what belonged to a much older countryside that simply put on a Christian cloak and kept going. At table on feast evenings, stories lengthen, a bowl is refilled, a cup goes round, a fiddler may appear if the village has one, or a piper, or merely someone brave enough to sing in public and inaccurate enough to be memorable. The room glows warmer, faces soften. Someone laughs before remembering they're tired. Someone else actually dances for half a minute and then sits down with the expression of a person who has made an avoidable but not regrettable choice. Children grow bright-eyed, then overbold, then suddenly drooping with sleep at the edge of the bench. You imagine the churchyard after Mass on such days too. People lingering in knots under the fading light, talking longer than usual because labour has, for once, permitted it. News passes, matches are half made, old grievances are temporarily wrapped in politeness. Pilgrim badges are noticed. A stranger's accent draws attention. Someone claims to have heard at market that a relic in a distant abbey worked wonders for a crippled shepherd. Someone else says wonders often happen after good ale. A third says that if good ale cured cripples, half the village would be sainted by now. The joke drifts through the group and lands gently, the way good village humour always does, without much force and with enough truth to keep it alive. Evening light on feast days behaves differently, or seems to. Perhaps because people are outside to notice it. Perhaps because labour has loosened its grip by one finger. The roofs of the cottages catch the last pale gold. Smoke rises blue in the cooling air. The church tower stands darker now against the west. Somewhere a bell rings again, softer in the dimness. The lane smells of trampled grass, warm bread, smoke, and damp stone. For a little while. The village feels almost suspended, not freed from hardship, but lifted just enough above it to see the pattern. You know, though, as everyone knows, that the pause cannot hold, the fire will burn down, the cups will empty, the borrowed bench must go home, the goosebones must be boiled again for broth, the better cloak has to be folded away before sparks touch it. The child asleep under the table must be carried in. Tomorrow the animals still need feeding. The ditch still needs clearing. The field still answers only to weather and toil. Feast days are gracious visitors, not permanent residents. That awareness gives them their sweetness. When you stand at the edge of the yard in the last of the light, hearing the tail end of a song from another cottage and the low murmur of neighbours parting after church, you feel how closely joy and necessity live together here, not as enemies, not even as rivals, more like weary companions sharing a bench, a little ale, a little laughter, a saint's day, a ribbon saved from market, a pie that took too much flour but was made anyway. A candle burned lower than Prudence liked because the room looked lovelier for it. Some feast customs are stranger still. People say that on certain vigils dreams are truer, that herbs gathered on St. John's Eve heal better, that a loaf baked on one holy day keeps mould away longer than on another. Some swear cattle blessed on particular mornings fare better through winter. Others leave little offerings at roadside crosses or touch church walls when passing in stormy weather. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these are fragments of faith, fear, memory, or just habits that have survived because they make the world feel a touch less exposed. But few are willing to test the difference by neglecting them altogether. The fire before you has dropped to coals now, red and steady. The talk in the room has softened. Someone folds away a cloth. Someone banks the embers. Someone says the weather may yet turn in the night, and 3 people answer with 3 different saints' names and one practical suggestion about bringing the woodpile closer to the door. This is how the sacred and the ordinary remain married in village life: one prayer, one proverb, one sensible chore. Outside, the light is nearly gone. What remains of the feast has become warmth in the walls, grease in the pot, crumbs on the board, a memory of song, a beeswax scent lingering in wool, and that gentle inward easing that comes when people have, for one evening, allowed themselves to be more than engines of survival. But only for one evening, because the fading light says what it always says, beautifully, quietly, without malice. The day is ending. The holy pause is ending with it. Cloaks must be gathered, doors barred, ashes banked, tools found again at dawn. And so, even after bells, candles, blessings, and a little extra bread, the village turns back toward necessity. The feast does not defeat the farmer's life. It simply lays a warm hand on its shoulder before letting it continue into the dark. By the time the feast glow has faded into memory and the last richer crumbs have been brushed from the board or saved for morning, evening has fully become itself. The village settles under darkness not all at once, but in layers. First the sky dims, then the lanes lose their edges, then the hedges turn to shadow, then the very shape of the fields seems to withdraw from the world, as if the land has wrapped a cloak about its shoulders and chosen not to be looked at again until dawn. This is the hour when all the day's outward labour folds inward toward animals, firelight, and the long, slow business of keeping things from falling apart before sleep. You step back into the yard with a lantern or a smoking light, and its glow does not so much illuminate the world as carve a tiny circle out of it. Beyond that circle waits everything else: the byre, the stack, the fence line, the low black shape of the cart, the damp earth trodden all day into ruts and ridges, and the broad dark of the fields beyond. Above, there may be stars if the clouds have thinned, or only a blank overcast ceiling hanging low enough to feel close. The air smells cooler now, mixed with wet straw, animal heat, wood smoke, and that faint mineral scent of night settling onto open ground. The animals must be checked once more. Of course they must. A medieval day only pretends to be ending. In truth, it simply changes from labour you can see across a field to labour conducted in close quarters, one hand on a latch and the other on a creature that may decide to be difficult precisely because you are tired enough to deserve it. Inside the byre, the warmth hits you first, close and alive, heavy with dung, hay, breath, and hide. It is not a clean warmth, but it is humanly welcome all the same. A cow turns her large dark head toward the light. One of the goats shifts and knocks something with a hollow wooden thud, then looks at you with the serene innocence of the guilty. Chickens mutter on their perch. A pig, if there is one, offers a brief grunt of opinion. The sounds are low and repetitive, the night language of domestic creatures settling themselves into darkness. You move among them with the familiar gestures the body has now learned. Check the water, check the feed, check the tether, hand on the gate, eye on the latch, run fingers over a flank, feel for heat where it should not be. Watch for the odd stillness that means more than sleep. In peasant life, the difference between a beast resting and a beast sickening matters too much to ignore. That is why animal care at night carries its own kind of attention. Quieter and more intimate than the field's labour, but no less serious. One of the hens has tucked herself in an impossible corner again, and you reach awkwardly to nudge her back toward better order. Another flaps just enough to scatter feathers and annoyance. The goat catches the edge of your tunic with its teeth and is discouraged from theological speculation. A cow exhales across your hand in a long, warm breath that smells of cud and patience. The whole place is dense with life that cannot simply be left until morning. That is the burden and the blessing. These creatures demand. They also sustain. Milk, eggs, manure, pulling power, meat in harsher times, warmth by proximity, status by number, worry by the hour. Animals are wealth with appetites attached. You step back outside to fetch more straw or carry out a basket of soiled bedding, and the darkness feels deeper after the buyer's closeness. The yard glistens in places where damp still lies over the mud. The cartwheel, still not fully right despite every intention, leans as though exhausted by its own condition. Near the wood pile, someone is stacking the last cut pieces under cover, because rain may yet come in the night, and wood left, careless, becomes morning misery. Every object here seems to have a future problem hidden inside it if neglected long enough. That is why evening repairs continue even now, after fieldwork, market errands, household tending, and supper. A harness strap must be checked before dawn reveals it broken when most needed. A hinge must be fastened before wind decides to finish the argument. The buyer gate must be wedged properly. A broken stool leg must be bound or pegged if no better solution presents itself. A bucket handle, if left loose, will always choose the worst possible moment to fail. Usually when the bucket is full and your temper is not. You sit on a low block or near the doorway with a knife, cord, peg, or awl, and turn your hands to one more task. Perhaps the harness leather cracked earlier under strain. Perhaps the cart's lashings need tightening. Perhaps the iron hook at the hearth must be bent back into use. The work is fine in scale now, closer, more exact, though no less essential. Firelight and lantern light do not flatter workmanship. They reveal hesitation immediately. A knot tied badly by evening becomes a curse at dawn. Nearby, another pair of hands mends a cloak seam or patches a wool sleeve. Needlework in low light is one of the many medieval practices that proves human beings will attempt anything if enough necessity is involved. The new needle from market, if one was bought, gleams briefly and then disappears into purposeful motion. Stitch by stitch, the sleeve closes, stitch by stitch. Another small disaster is postponed. A peasant household often survives by inches and threads rather than grand solutions. Historians may speak of systems. Villagers speak of whether the strap will hold tomorrow. The animals shift again behind you. From somewhere farther down the lane comes the sound of another byre door shutting, then another, like a little chain of closures running through the village. Firelight glows behind shutter cracks. Smoke from banked hearths lies low in the cooling air. A child calls once, sleepily, from inside a cottage. A man coughs. A dog barks and is answered by another. Then quiet returns, though never fully. Night in a village is quieter than day, but it is not empty. It breathes. Some swear that animals see what humans do not after dark, that horses stare into corners where no one stands, that dogs bristle before weather changes or before stranger things pass, that hens unsettled on their roost may sense death, storm, or wandering spirits. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which explanation deserves the greater fear. But many a villager glancing into a dark byre keeps one corner of the mind open to the possibility that beasts know more than they are prepared to explain. A woman in the household mentions that the old mare in her father's village would always stamp and snort before a hard frost. Someone else replies that old mares stamp and snort before nearly everything, including boredom. The line earns the sort of evening smile too tired to become a laugh. That is enough. Humour at this hour is not meant to wake anyone fully. It is meant only to keep weariness from becoming too solemn. You carry another armful of straw. Your shoulders register it. Your hands register the prickle and dust. The byre floor is turned where it must be, fresh bedding laid down over the old where possible, because cleanliness in such places is relative but still important. Warm, dry straw means healthier beasts, easier mornings, less rot, fewer troubles hidden in hooves and joints. A nobleman may think of straw as background. A farmer knows it can mean the difference between a serviceable animal and a costly sorrow. There is the cart to consider too. Its wheel was never entirely trustworthy after that crack, and though no full repair can be managed tonight, the lashings are checked, the axle looked at, the load bed thumped and judged. A cart is one of those objects that spends most of its life proving how much trouble a few boards and a pair of wheels can generate. Yet without it, the whole rhythm of carrying and hauling frays, firewood, grain, dung, fodder, sheaves, sacks, barrels, even children when the road is long and their legs have entered moral collapse all sooner or later rely on the cart. So you run a hand along the rim and think, not for the first time, that wood has a vindictive streak when made circular. The evening goes on like this, not in one task completed grandly, but in many little continuations. Check, mend, carry, fasten, turn the straw, tie the cord, bank the wood, lift the bucket, shut the gate, each thing modest, each thing vital. This is how the day extends itself long past the point where any reasonable body would have asked to stop. Inside the cottage, the fire is lower now, steadier, its light more red than gold. Supper things are mostly cleared, a bowl remains on the board, a spoon rests beside it, wool blankets are being shaken out. The room smells of smoke, cooked onions, damp wool drying by the hearth, and the faint medicinal trace of salve from earlier. You come and go between house and yard, bringing the night indoors bit by bit, straw on your sleeves, cold on your face, the smell of the byre in your clothes. The dog, needless to say, has insinuated itself near the doorway again, exactly where feet, tools, and obligations all must pass. It opens one eye as if supervising the final repairs. Someone tells it to move. It does not. Eventually everyone steps around it. This is the sort of authority one can only respect. As the night deepens, the village becomes a map of tiny necessary lights. Here a tallow lamp. There the flare of a shutter briefly opened and closed. Beyond that, the red glow of a hearth, when a door cracks wide enough for the wind to notice. Then less and less. One cottage at a time. The visible world narrows. Yet the work within those walls continues, boots scraped, children undressed, ashes banked, herbs hung, cloaks folded, milk strained, bowls rinsed with precious water. Tomorrow's bread considered, tomorrow's weather guessed, tomorrow's labour already walking toward everyone in the dark. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the farmer's life is made more exhausting by the endless work itself, or by the impossibility of separating one kind of work from another. Feed the beasts, mend the gear, keep the house, count the stores, think of winter, check the roof, bank the fire, lie down at last, and then rise before the embers die. At last the last gate is secured, the harness will hold for another day. The cart will survive one more journey if treated with respect and moderate prayer. The straw is turned, the animals, if not pleased, are at least settled. The fire indoors waits to be banked. The household has reached that point in the evening when everyone moves a little more slowly, not because there is less to do, but because the body has begun quietly shutting doors of its own. So you step back from the byre, wipe your hands on your tunic, and stand for one breath in the dark yard. Smoke drifts above the roofs. Somewhere beyond the village the fields lie unseen but still present, broad and patient under the night. Tomorrow they will ask for you again. Tonight the animals, the firelight, and the mended things have claimed the last of your strength. And still, somehow, there is one more hour between you and sleep. That last hour before sleep is the strangest part of the day, because it belongs neither fully to labour nor fully to rest. The body has spent itself, the hands have done enough to claim a kind of honesty, and yet the mind lingers, unwilling to release the world entirely. You step back inside and close the door against the night, setting the latch with that small, satisfying finality that says, for now at least, the outside will remain outside. The cottage holds its warmth close. The fire has been banked carefully, the glowing coals drawn together and covered just enough that they will breathe through the night without consuming themselves. This is one of those quiet arts no one praises aloud, yet everyone depends upon, to wake to living embers rather than cold ashes to begin the next day with less struggle, and in a life measured by effort, even a small saving becomes a form of grace. Around you, the household settles. Cloaks are hung or folded, boots set near the wall, turned just so they might dry without stiffening too cruelly by morning. A blanket is shaken once and spread. A child is guided toward a pallet, protesting only enough to prove they are alive before surrendering completely to sleep. Someone checks the door again, though it has not moved. Someone else glances at the shutter, though it has not opened. These small repetitions are not mistakes. They are rituals of reassurance. You lower yourself onto the pallet or bench and feel at once the deep, steady ache of the day. It is no longer sharp. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, as constant and familiar as the smell of smoke in your clothes. Your shoulders settle. Your hands rest open for a moment, as though surprised to find nothing left to grip. But the mind, as always, continues. From outside comes the muted life of the village at night. A dog barks once, then again, then falls silent as if remembering the hour. Farther off, another answers, and for a moment the darkness feels threaded with unseen watchers. The wind moves through the hedges, catching dry twigs and leaves in a soft, restless whisper. Somewhere a loose board knocks faintly against a wall. These are small sounds, ordinary sounds, and yet in the quiet they take on weight, as if each carries a story just beyond understanding. Some swear that night in a medieval village is never truly empty, that beyond the reach of the hearth, beyond the ring of light cast by a single candle, the world fills with presences best left uncounted, spirits, perhaps, wandering souls, saints passing unseen, or simply the accumulation of fears given shape by darkness. No one can quite agree, and yet even the most practical among you will sometimes pause at the door before stepping out at night, as if listening for permission. You shift slightly under the blanket, pulling it closer around your shoulders. The wool is rough but warm, and warmth at night is a kindness that does not ask questions. Nearby, someone murmurs in their sleep, another coughs and turns. The fire gives a soft crack as a piece of wood settles deeper into ember. The room breathes. There is comfort here, though it is not the kind that erases worry. It is the kind that holds it at a distance for a few hours. The door is closed, the animals are settled, the tools are mended as well as they can be, the food is counted, the fire lives. That is enough for now. And yet, as you lie there, the thoughts come as they always do in this hour between waking and sleep. You think of the field, still dark beyond the village, waiting. You think of the sky that refused to decide whether to rain. You think of the manor court, the quiet weight of words spoken and written. You think of the market, of voices and goods, and the brief illusion of a wider life. You think of the stores in the loft, measured not in abundance but in endurance. You think of winter not as a distant season, but as a presence that sits patiently in every decision. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these thoughts are burdens or simply the shape of life itself. A faint scratching sound comes from near the wall. A mouse, perhaps, testing the boundaries of your household as boldly as any tax collector. Somewhere in the room, a sleeper shifts and mutters something that might be a name or might be nothing at all. The dog outside circles once, twice, then settles with a sigh that carries faintly through the door. You close your eyes. For a moment, there is only darkness and the slow rhythm of your own breathing. Then, as often happens, the mind begins to drift not into dreams yet, but into that soft, uncertain space where memory and imagination meet. The field appears again, but quieter now, the furrows smoothed, the sky clear, the village lane empty, the bell sounding distant and gentle, a feast day that lingers longer than it should, a harvest that never quite ends. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether dreams in such a life belong to rest or to reflection. Some say dreams are the soul walking where the body cannot. Others say they are nothing more than the mind sorting its burdens. But here, in the dim warmth of the cottage, it hardly matters. Sleep, when it comes, is not questioned. Your body yields first. The ache fades into something softer. The weight of the blanket becomes steady and reassuring. The sounds of the room grow distant, as if carried away on the same wind that moves through the hedges outside. The last ember of wakefulness flickers, then dims, and yet, even as sleep begins to take you, there is that quiet understanding deep, steady, unspoken that this rest is only a pause, because in a farmer's life, the night does not end the day. It simply prepares the next one. Sleep takes you, but never so deeply that the world fully loosens its hold. That is the last truth of the farmer's life, and perhaps the simplest. Even lying beneath a wool blanket in the warmth left by banked embers, you do not belong wholly to rest. You belong partly to the weather, partly to the animals in the byre, partly to the grain in the loft, partly to the Lord whose claims wait patiently in daylight, and partly to the old turning of the seasons that cares nothing for your weariness. Night is not an ending here. It is an interval, a soft dark bracket set around labour so the body can begin again. You lie in that interval now, somewhere between sleeping and hearing, The cottage has settled into its midnight breathing. The fire gives off a low, red pulse beneath ash. Smoke still clings faintly to the rafters. The rushes on the floor hold the scent of the day dust. Straw, a little spilled broth, old herbs, damp wool drying too close to the hearth. Nearby, someone turns in sleep and sighs through the nose with the long-suffering dignity of a person whose dreams are probably no more comfortable than their palate. Outside the oak door, beyond the iron latch, the dog shifts once and then grows still again. The whole household rests, but not carelessly. Even sleep feels practical here. At some dark hour in the night, rain finally comes. Not a storm, not a wild judgment flung from heaven, but a patient rain that begins so lightly you think at first you've imagined it. Then it grows. A soft tapping on the thatch, a quieter drumming over the lean-to, a slow, steady whisper in the yard where the mud, already well acquainted with moisture, welcomes more with vulgar enthusiasm. You hear it through sleep. Everyone hears it. Perhaps, though no one fully wakes, in a peasant household, rain at night enters the mind immediately. It means a different path by morning, heavier wheels, wet wood if the stack was badly covered, slick ground by the byre, better water in the ditch perhaps, worse temper in the lane certainly. No one can quite agree whether rain heard from bed is more comforting or more threatening. It depends entirely on what lies cut in the field, what lies stored in the loft, and how honest the roof has been lately. You surface briefly into waking and listen. There is no leak above you. Thanks be to God, or at least none that has found its way to your face. A blessing so modest modern people would hardly notice. It feels, here, almost luxurious. You pull the blanket closer, hear the rain deepen, and then steady and drift again. When next you wake, it is not to light but to sound. The bell. Far away, carried through wet dawn air. A monastery bell rolls over the fields once more. Then another note answers from nearer at hand. Perhaps the parish church. Perhaps only memory layering one sound over another. Morning has returned, though the room remains dim and grey. The fire, banked well, still hides life beneath ash. Someone is already stirring it. Someone else is coughing softly. A child makes the small wounded noise of one betrayed by sleep ending too soon. The day, having waited with great patience, now places its hand on the latch. You open your eyes and see the beams above, dark with smoke, exactly where they were last night. The blanket is still rough, your shoulders are still sore, your hands, when you flex them, remember everything. The body does not wake fresh so much as resumed. And that is the point. A medieval farmer's life never really ended because each day rose out of the one before it like a furrow following a furrow. Nothing stood alone. Yesterday's fieldwork became today's stiffness. Yesterday's rain became today's mud. Yesterday's market bargain became today's new cord on the harness. Yesterday's court ruling became today's obligation. Yesterday's supper became this morning's strength. If strength is the word for carrying on because carrying on is the only available craft. You sit up on the pallet and the cold finds you at once, creeping into the gap at your neck, along your sleeves, down toward your ankles where your boots wait like old enemies who know you too well to bother pretending courtesy. The rushes crackle underfoot when you stand. The room smells of wet air filtering through shutter cracks, smoke revived by the kindling flame, and wool that never quite dries in one night. Someone opens the door, and dawn appears in the form of a grey yard shining with rain. There it is again, the byre, the trough, the leaning cart, the path stamped into muck, the woodpile under its covering, beyond it, the fields, misted and wide and already asking for judgment. Can the strip be worked today? Will the soil cling too hard? Did the ditch hold? Will the reeve press the labour all the same? Is the path to market worse now? Has the rain helped more than it harmed? Every answer begins as a guess. Farming is a life built on informed guessing and stubborn response. You step outside and the world greets you with wet earth, cold air, and the smell of animals rising warmly from the byre. Your breath comes pale. The dog, damp around the edges but morally intact, emerges from under the cart and shakes itself with such force and indignation you would think the rain had been arranged specifically to insult it. That, at least, is one creature in the village whose sense of personal drama has survived the centuries untouched. The mud grips at once. Of course it does. The yard sucks at your boots. Rain beads on the fence rails and hangs from the eaves. Water stands in the deeper wheel ruts, reflecting a sky the colour of old pewter. From somewhere across the fields comes the low call of another farmer to his beasts, and from somewhere nearer the clatter of a pail, the cry of a child, the muttered greeting of a woman already at work. The whole village is waking in the same wet half-light, pulled once again into motion by need, bell, weather, and habit. You cross to the byre and open it. Warm breath greets you. Steam lifts from the backs of animals in the colder air. The cow shifts. The goat complains. Chickens mutter on their perch. Their needs do not pause for reflection, and there is something almost merciful in that. Thought can wait when there is grain to scatter and water to lift. As you work, the rain thins to mist. The bell sounds again, quieter now, or perhaps simply absorbed into the rest of morning. You realize, with a kind of sleepy clarity, that this is why the life never ended. Not only because there was always more labour, though there was, not only because the Lord demanded, or the field required, or the animals called, or the weather interfered, though all of that is true. It never ended because the boundaries modern people might draw between tasks, between home and work, between rest and duty, between season and season, did not exist cleanly here. The household was labour, the meal was labour, sleep was preparation for labour, memory was a tool of labour, even prayer, at times, felt like labour offered upward in hope of lighter burdens below. You fetch water again. Rope burns the palm again. The bucket rises gleaming and cold again. Someone breaks bread indoors. Someone coughs over the hearth. A voice mutters that the path will be vile after such rain. Another answers that it was vile before, and this is merely a theological deepening. The line earns a low laugh from the doorway. There is still room for a joke. Then, a small one, sleepy and damp around the edges. That is as it should be. Beyond the yard, the lanes are already moving. A figure in a fur-lined cloak, hemmed dark with wet, heads toward the fields with the tool over one shoulder. Another carries fodder. Two boys argue over a bucket as if justice itself hangs from the handle. Smoke rises more hesitantly in the moist air. A bell note lingers over all of it. The village is not beginning so much as continuing. It was always continuing. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the hardest part of medieval farming was the labour itself, the uncertainty, the constant dependence, or the simple fact that no part of the day truly belonged only to you. But standing here, wet boots in wet mud, hands stinging from cold water, shoulders already preparing themselves for another turn of the earth, you suspect the answer is all of it together. The burden was not in any single task. It was in the unbrokenness. The endless joining of need to need, season to season, bell to bell, dawn to dawn. And yet there is something else in that unbrokenness too. Something steady, something almost tender in its severity. The same path worn by the same feet, the same hearth coaxed alive each morning, the same fields answering differently every year and yet always needing the same patient human motions, the same bread, the same smoke, the same damp hay, the same iron latch lifted in darkness, the same dog under the cart, the same bells over mist. Life narrows here. Yes, it repeats. It wearies. But repetition also binds. It makes a world, however small, hold together. You carry the bucket back to the house and pause just outside the door. Inside, the fire has caught. The room glows faintly. A crust waits on the board. The day is opening like every day before it. There will be chores, weather, perhaps a quarrel, perhaps a kindness, perhaps a broken thing, perhaps a rumour from the road, perhaps a bell at noon, perhaps a moment by the hearth when warmth reaches your hands before the rest of you. There will be worry in the loft and mud in the yard and smoke in the rafters. There will be work owed and work chosen and work simply unavoidable. And tomorrow, if tomorrow comes, there will be much the same again. So you step back inside, carrying cold water into warmth, rain into smoke, dawn into the old familiar room. The blanket is folded away, the bowl is lifted, the latch settles behind you. The farmer's life, having paused only just long enough to keep you standing, begins once more. Now the pace softens. The fire burns low and steady, and the room grows gentler around its edges. The roughness of the blanket no longer feels harsh, only familiar. The ache in your shoulders becomes less a complaint than a quiet reminder that your body belongs to the same world as the fields, the beasts, the rain, and the bells. Outside, the village dims once more in the imagination, not in darkness now, but in distance, as if it is drifting away across mist. You do not need to hold all of it anymore, not the court, not the market, not the winter stores, not the leaning cartwheel, not the weather signs written in clouds and birds. Let them loosen, let the bells grow faint, let the mud settle back into the lanes without asking anything more of you tonight. Let the smoke rise softly into the rafters and disappear. Let the dog curl beneath the cart in peace. Let the ox stand warm in the byre. Let the grain rest in its sack. Let the saints keep their watch without help from your tired thoughts. The cottage is warm, the wool is heavy, the embers glow like little red stars beneath ash. Somewhere a final drip of rain falls from the eaves. Somewhere a child sleeps. Somewhere beyond the fields. The monastery bells wait for another dawn, but not yet. Not yet. For now there is only this stillness, this dimness, this soft medieval hush of wood smoke, wool, and fading firelight. The day has gone quiet. The road has gone quiet. Even the old worries, so faithful all evening, draw back and sit down in the shadows. You have done enough. The fields can wait in the dark. The manor can wait. The market can wait. Winter itself can wait a little while longer. So breathe slowly. Let the room blur into warmth and ember glow. Let the old world fade at the edges until all that remains is the gentle sense of shelter, of being held for a little while in a place of oak, straw, and fire. The night is kind now. The dark is deep and calm, and somewhere far beyond sleep, morning will come in its own time.